Okay, Monday, June the 20th, and we'll call to order. The Bastrop EDC Board reserves the right to convene to executive session at any time during this meeting regarding any agenda item in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551 of the Government Code. First of all, I'd like to hope everybody had a wonderful Father's Day with their family and whatnot. And we got to take a little bit of time off, which is great. Now, if we could just get a little bit of rain out there and some cool weather, it'd be wonderful, wouldn't it? Okay, starting off, do we have any public comments?
We only have the one that Mr. Smarsick put in for that one specific line item. I believe it was 3.5. Okay. Very good. So after we listen to that portion of it, then we'll ask you for your comments then. Okay, 3.1, approval of the meeting minutes from the BEDC board meeting of May 16th, 2022.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye. 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 All those that don't like it? All right, it passes. Trying to liven it up a little bit here. 3.2, receive financial report provided by the City of Bastrop Chief's Financial Officer for the period ending May 2022.
So the report is provided by Tracy as indicated in the package. No major comments or anything beyond what she has indicated.
Okay, any questions, any discussion on it? Okay.
I have one request, if you don't mind. We have two pretty substantial contracts, one with Mr. Weathers and one with Jorgensen, and sometimes we track costs, and we like those line items are called out, and I know that they're rolled in, but they're fairly small considered to the total line item. Could we just get a report on that so we know what we've spent to date on those two things?
Can.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
All right, then we'll move on to 3.3, and it's the presentation of the BEDC consultant, Mr. Steve Weathers. Hello there, Mr. Weathers.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the time today. Appreciate it. Let me make sure I need to get through. There we go, right there. There we go. Okay. I'm going to cover two things today. First is going to be this strategic alignment report, which you all have received a copy of. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the report, but I'm really going to use these slides as sort of a summary of it to kind of have that. And then the second thing, once we have our questions, discussion, whatever, is I'm going to give you a quick update on the Jorgensen group and where they are, next steps for the search. And then I think all of you will meet on that, and then we need to get the really next step for all of you is to finalize the job profile. And once that's finalized, then the search will really kick off. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Okay, so before I get into this, any questions ahead of time? Comments, questions? No? Okay. Okay, well, let's get started. Okay, so as you see here in this PowerPoint, I put up there, it's creating a shared vision and alignment, and really I put up there produced from input provided by the economic development stakeholders. I have a little bit of an opinion in there, but this really isn't a Steve Weathers opinion report. This is all of you and others that we met with, and this is basically putting this into how can we create this alignment, really listening to all the different strategic partners that are out there, okay? I did make a note in there. You saw where this is really meant to be a working document. It's meant to be incorporated into the strategic plan, to other things if you see fit. It's not really meant to just review and sit on a shelf, so it's actually more of a playbook that we're using here. So acknowledgments. Let me go through this real quickly here. I do want to acknowledge all the people that I met with, all of you as the board of directors. I met with the current slate of elected officials at the city, 2 county commissioners within the city manager, 2 assistant city managers, CFO, met with the county staff, the director of tourism and economic development, received input also from the Bastrop EDC staff, and then met with the CEOs of the Chamber of Visit Bastrop, and then also the immediate past chair of the Bastrop Independent School District. So 23 in total. Everybody provided great input. Everybody was very thoughtful about it. And again, when we get to the recommendations, really all of those are just putting what a lot of you and others said into some action items, okay? So objective and methodology. So the objective really is quite simple. It was to capture the insights of the economic development partners and start to create a shared vision and alignment between the BEDC and the city. And then the methodology here was, again, I mentioned the 23 one-on-one interviews, and in your packet you also saw there's 5 questions. Everybody received those questions ahead of time so everybody could give those thoughts. Kind of gave us apples to apples and a baseline. And while we might have had some other conversations, really that was the crux of everything. We really didn't deviate from that to just ask some other question, okay? So we kind of stuck with those. Then again, other materials I used that you see up there are just documents I wanted to review and kind of gather additional input. Okay, so setting the stage. So the background part's a little longer, but I kind of consolidated it down to these 4 items, which are really seem the most critical. And I think there's no secret that there has been a dysfunctional relationship between the BEDC and the city for some time. I think that's not a secret. There's been a high number or high turnover rate in leadership of the city and the BEDC. The BDC is without a CEO right now, a chief executive officer. The city manager is going to be leaving in August. And I would credit this board and the mayor and city council that both of you have engaged an executive search firm to really fill those positions. So I kind of expect those to be filled, I would say maybe in the September, August timeframe. And then a lot of other things will change the dynamic there. So I think that's, again, a credit to this board and to the mayor and city council for doing that. There's been a lack of direction and expectation provided by the city to the BEDC board, and I think that was what prompted the creation of the Economic Development Policy Resolution number 2022-26, which you've all read and seen. But I also think to this last point, there's been poor communication among the parties and lack of collaboration between them, and I think that policy was not really enthusiastically received by a majority of this board. And I think from what I gather from input, there really wasn't a lot of conversation maybe between the city and the BEDC, either at the leadership or at the staff level. Okay, so those are really the main things right there in the background. Okay, so findings and conclusions. These really come from the questions. Again, this is all of your input and others' input. The permitting process is too cumbersome and takes too long. I'm not saying, again, that that's my opinion or that is something that, I don't know enough about the permitting here. That's what was told to me by a number of people, okay? Again, these are kind of what they feel. The Bastrop building block, or B3 code, hinders development within the city. And again, another strong comment made by a number of people was that builders and developers do not want to build in the city of Bastrop. There's a lack of consistent coordinated communication among staff and the leadership level. I think you guys do talk, but I don't know if there's enough really in-depth talk even behind the scenes of where are we going, what's the direction there. Okay. BDC should be a proactive business recruitment, and I think that will be rectified and changed once the CEO's on board and their staff there. And I mentioned it later in this report, but the organization is very understaffed. So some of these comments, don't take them as an indictment of staff. Jean and Angela and Ashley do a great job, but they're stretched so thin, they just can't do everything that really needs to be done. So once I think there's a more robust staff, some of these things will, I think, correct themselves. The BDC should have a focus on shovel-ready sites in the industrial park. Make sure we're good to go there. And then, again, better coordination among funding of infrastructure improvements. And a good example will be today, you're going to hear about, I think, some infrastructure improvement broadband from the city. And I'll be curious to hear how that conversation goes and, what the result of that is. Okay. Let's see here. Is that working? There we go. Okay, so kind of the conclusion of this really, lack of communication, which came up from almost everybody. High turnover in leadership, again, which came up. A lack of trust, that was actually stated by a number of different people, just trust on all sides. A lack of direction and expectation. A less than friendly permitting process, and then really no proactive marketing or communication, from an economic development standpoint. So there's things to be done, and I think all of these things can be corrected and brought to bear and be improved. I have no doubt of that. Okay, so recommendations. I broke these down into a couple of areas. The first one here is you read in the report, improving communication, collaboration, trust, strengthening the relationship, and that's what I think these do right here. Again, this is sort of the short version, the longer one's in the report, is really a meeting weekly between the new chief executive officer and the new city manager. Again, coffee, Tracy's drive-in grocery, I kind of mentioned that, great coffee, love to go there, have coffee, 30 minutes. Have lunch, lots of places to have lunch. And they don't have to talk about work, family, golf, weather, whatever they want to talk about. It's the idea of building that relationship between those two leaders, which is going to be critical. The next one here, the city should be inviting the BDC staff preferably probably the CEO, but it could be other staff, to attend their department head meetings. I don't know if they do that right now, and that's something that if they should know what's going on in the city should know what's going on, and that's just staff to staff. The BDC should be inviting the city staff, preferably an assistant city manager, to attend their staff meetings and learn more about the projects. Again, building those relationships, being in front of each other, seeing each other, talking, okay, learning what's going on. And the board and the city council, and I think you do hold these, but it wasn't really talked a lot about. It was kind of mentioned there should be workshops. I think you've done those, but this is something where maybe you structure workshops jointly, and it's really around economic development, strategy, what's working, what's not working, where are the successes, just are we on track for where we want to get as an elected body and as an appointed body, okay? Okay, these next four I put really around the BDC becoming the subject matter expert with economic development. And I think that's something that they should be the go-to body for anything that's economic development related. So the BDC staff should have representation at all city council and committee meetings. They should know what's going on. Again, they're stretched so thin, can't do it, but I think once they're fully staffed, that should be something they should be doing. They should also be attending the Chamber of Commerce meetings, visit Bastrop ISD meetings. Again, what's going on out there? Their face should be out there everywhere. The city should have senior staff representation at the board meetings. Not an assistant city manager or city manager, just again, so they know. You already do have elected officials, which is good, but you know, they're not as much, the staff should really be here also, I think. And again, like I started, the BDC staff should be the subject matter expert with regard to economic development. They should be the go-to for the mayor, the city council, all of you, the community at large. You know, where are we going? What are we doing? And this is a way for them to get there, okay? The BDC office should be moved to City Hall. I talked a little bit more about that a little bit in depth in this report right now. They're kind of out of sight, out of mind. I've heard the story of why they're there, but they should be located in this building if there's room. There should also be signage outside that shows they're here. That way they interact with city staff, maybe elected officials all the time. Their face is prominent. They should have their business cards out front here. They don't. All the other department heads do. So if they're going to be working with the city, they should be located here. I think that would really help in strengthening this relationship, especially between the leadership and just the staff and the department heads, okay? There should be an onboarding process for BDC board members. From my conversations, I understand there is one for elected officials, but there's not here. And that should be something that's led by the staff itself, including the legal counsel, the partners, the city manager, staff. So when you're appointed to this board, you should really have a good lay of the land and receive that information and know who the go-to is. And you know who the staff is that's small here, but do you have all the contact information of all the partners you need to talk to? I mean, maybe you just know them because you see them at a restaurant or something, but you know, who do you go to for those things, okay? This next one here, BDC board members should be required, I think, for appointment here, that they should be required to take a basic economic development course. I can't really say it of council and the mayor because that's different. They can't really require it, but you could require it here, and I say that because all of you are professionals in your own right. All the partners I met with are professionals. The elected officials are. But I couldn't find one person on this body or elected that has any educational or work experience in economic development that's actually done kind of what I've done. And if they have, it was not brought up to my attention. Somebody that served as a CEO of an economic development organization, served as a vice president. You all are experts in your areas, but this, I think, doing that, and to take it further, what I'd suggest in building the relationship is that, and I don't think this violates any open meeting laws, if you agree to do that, 2 elected officials and 2 of these board members go at the same time. Spend 2 or 3 days off-site doing this, learning the same thing, sitting in a room, breaking bread, getting to know each other, okay? That helps versus in this sort of formal setting here. I'd also kind of suggest that the BDC be willing to fund this. It shouldn't be city tax money, taxpayer money. This is the economic development entity. They have the funds to do it. Become the experts, okay? So be the backbone of that. Okay. Whoop. Let's see here. New chief executive officer, once they're on board, they should really have this place fully staffed within the first year. I think that's more than enough time for them to bring on the staff. And I mean, I can always share ideas and thoughts, but they're going to have their own as to what they want to do here. And it's really going to be based on the plan, your vision, what all of you want to do. And then all economic development related media should be coordinated between the BEDC and the city. Their logo's on there. We've talked about it before. if you could push it further, I'd say anything economic development-wise, if you have a media communication person, I think that's one of the issues now, because there's nobody that's assigned to that. A lot of things that they do are not talked about. And if you had that person, they would be coordinating with the public information officer here, making sure, hey, we're getting good news out, not just bad news about economic development. And the last one here, it did come up a few times from people saying BEDC should work with the school district. Well, I know they do that. Jean definitely knows they do that. I think she reported on that last time. But that story's not really told out there. So other than a few people, stakeholders don't know that. So this is another reason to really work with them. Education is paramount to companies that locate here, especially K through 12, making sure that, okay, you know, what are we doing to kind of make sure we have a well-educated workforce here, okay? And make that visible. In your packet, again, you have these 5 questions. The other thing in Appendix B, if you look at these are really the comments from all the stakeholders in various areas I broke down. And then in the very back of this, I have a ton of quotes, but I just provided a few select quotes from different people. There's no names on here, so you won't know who any of these people are unless you read it yourself and it's your quote. And then the thing we will do tomorrow morning is we'll send this report and a copy of this PowerPoint to all the other stakeholders that conducted interviews and took time to do that. I wanted to see the results of this and where it was so they can read that. So everybody in that acknowledgement list, you obviously already have yours, but we'll send that to all the council members and everybody else that's on there, okay? So, questions, thoughts, opinions?
Well, I guess I'll start off.
There's no action needed.
No. I think everybody here knows that we've had issues, problems in the past. A lot of what took place in the past led up to a lot of the issues that we're having today. And, you know, what you have done is opened up everybody's eyes to see what everybody else was thinking, because you're right. The lack of communication is probably the biggest area that that really, you know, is easy. On one hand, it's easy to rectify, but on the other hand, it can also be a little bit difficult too. You know, what you have shown us here is that we have a lot of work to do, and I think we all know that, right? We just have a whole lot of work to do, and it's incumbent on all of us to get this done. It's time to, you know, there's changes coming up, which you've outlined, which is good. I mean, change can be good. We've got some new city council members. We're you know, the city manager's going to go do his dream job at A&M, I believe, and you know, so there's going to be a new person coming on board. So I think we're all looking forward to making this thing be a much better working environment, and you know, it's. I think it's a good report myself. I mean, it's kind of hard to hear sometimes when you read the whole report and see what other people are saying, but at the end of the day, the truth is the truth. And so if we're doing something wrong, then let's see what we can do to correct some of these things. So I, for one, appreciate the report.
Thank you, and I think, you know, I made a comment in there, if you can remove emotion, which is hard, we're all human. Everybody has their eccentricities. And you look at the recommendations from just a logical standpoint, all those things can be accomplished. All those things, and I think if you really sit back and look at it, I think if somebody outside read that, they go, wow, that would help. Physical move, working together, meeting in the other person's camp, inviting each other back and forth. Just again, the 2 leaders having coffee once a week. Maybe they never talk about work. That's okay. They get to know each other. Other comments?
Yeah, I appreciate the broadness of the stakeholders that you sought out and even adapted to during the process. It was, you know, you started the process at one point and then even broadened it with further questions into the county, into the ISD and so forth, and that's greatly appreciated. And the consistency of the questions, greatly appreciated. Again, like Ron said, the findings are, you know, sometimes you look at them and a little bit disappointed in the reflection in the mirror. But like you said, I don't see anything insurmountable in the proposals and the recommendations. I think it's really up to the stakeholders to work together to bring it to a better overall result for the city.
Yeah, and I would actually want to publicly acknowledge Jean and Angela, the other ones who actually recommended meeting with the county. So they were, again, part of making sure we had a broad spectrum of opinion in there, so they get credit for that.
I have a question for you related to the recommendations. Would this make a good to-do list to pursue? And then do you have any suggestions related to implementation? Should we begin tackling it immediately with the expectation to try to get these things established in the next 60 days? Or do you have any recommendations along timelines,
Yeah.
right? Again, great recommendations. How do we facilitate the change?
Yeah, I think a couple of them, a good example is moving the office to, here. That's a structural thing. That conversation could start tomorrow. That would have to be, I think, something this board would want to vote on and approve. If you don't approve it, it can't go anywhere. So that's got to be maybe an action item for all of you, right? And then also having conversations with the city manager and the city staff. Do they even have room here if they were to do that? So maybe the homework ahead of time is for staff, and I'm happy to help out, have a conversation with the city manager and say, okay, if we were to come over here, where would we be? Is there physical space? And seeing that, just, again, my opinion, you may end up with 5 staff or 6 staff in economic development, more so than just the 2 you have now. So if you have room for that, and then be able to come back to this board and say, yes, structurally it can be done, would you all approve that? Okay? And then I don't know if the city council or mayor have to vote on that, or if that's a city manager decision. I just don't know that.
There's more than just that. I mean, it may be a good idea. We may have a plan to do something like that, but we have to look at what the leases are right now. We have to look at all
yeah,
the legal
yeah.
ramifications of that. It's not a bad recommendation at all, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think part of the answer may also be that we need to get the new people in place. That's going to be a primary thing to get this thing off the ground and really running, is to get, we have a new CEO that we have yet to recognize who that is. We will have a new city manager.
Mm-hmm.
So there's people that need to be in place before we can really start. I mean, there's some groundwork we can do to answer your question, I think. And I'm not trying to speak for you, but I mean, it just makes sense to me that there's some things that we can do, get prepared for, but we really need to get these new people on board.
Yeah, and I plan to, unless you all object, to include these recommendations in the revised strategic plan, which I'm kind of starting to work on now. And it's going to be the same kind of a document where, hey, this is a working document. It's not going to be overwhelming of 70 pages because you can't digest that. What are some things that we can actually, and Jen, to your point, start to take and move on? Some things will be, well, you need this city manager and CEO before you start those meetings, right? And then I think a lot of this has to be run by the new CEO to say, here's the plan, but you're the CEO. Like it, don't like it, that's okay. Change it, revise it. So I don't think you want to hand the CEO a book and say, here's your playbook, run it. They're going to need to have their fingerprints on it too. But I think some of these things can be done now. Okay, we can start down the road on those.
Regarding the staff, obviously they are spread thin. Did you have any specific ideas on what might constitute a fully staffed office? And I do like the idea of them being in the same building.
Mm-hmm. If it were me, I'd want to see at least 2 business development people, marketing and communications person, somebody that knows infrastructure. You have an industrial park. Who handles that data? Who's somebody that really, and I only go from my past experience in an organization where I actually had a builder, developer, construction person because we owned 500 acres and we owned 20 buildings and we had to actually manage property and we owned 2 railroads. So, we had to actually do those things. So, I mean, that's just the start.
We're talking 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah, I think once the CEO's on board,
I'd wait for that.
That person's opinion is the most important. But I think when you look at all this, I think Gene and Angela do a good job with the pipeline. I haven't really gotten a lot into that, but if they're doing that, does it go to the marketing communication? And starting with the communication of just meeting together. Okay, and I think we'll talk with council, how many of you can meet with how many elected officials and not, have an open meetings issue and start to really, maybe it's you guys having coffee, lunch and talking and, going through these things.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I appreciate the recognition that we're going to have to probably wait for a lot of these things to be implemented until we get CEO, both at the city as well as at the EDC. But I think one of the things we can start now, shame on us if we don't start working on improving communication collectively. And we can start doing that now. So any recommendations that you might have relative to directly to communication, I'd be happy to listen to them.
Well, let me ask, since all of you have been in office here. And is there, because I haven't delved deep into this, is there a PIO, a public information officer here at the city? There is? Okay. So maybe it just starts with somebody like myself meeting with the PIO saying, hey, and with the maybe support of the council, can we get you to kind of help with communications and starting some of this joint communication right now? They already have somebody. If you don't have anybody at the organization, which you don't, I don't think you want to hire somebody for $4,000 a month just to write press releases. Maybe they kind of step in and help you out with some communication items.
Well, one thing of note is that currently, and it may change soon, but there is not a reporter covering the city of Bastrop right now. Boston American-Statesman, the editor has gotten a promotion, so he's saying grace over more things. And back in 2017, we had 2 reporters sitting in every council meeting, and they sometimes came to our BEDC meetings as well. So there was reports coming out on a regular basis. So right now, they're not picking up the stories, and not to be ugly, but they don't have a huge circulation anyway. The majority of information that's going out, I believe the City of Bastrop is happy to share metrics, and they do on their quarterly report of how many people really and truly website and Facebook and different emails that people sign up for push information, that there's a lot more hits on that. And I know with Golden Shovel that EDC also keeps track of open rates and how many people are hitting it. So that, yes, it's important for communication, but it's different when you don't have a major newspaper, a daily newspaper, a reporter that's covering you on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I think, Mayor, if, again, if it were me, a person I'd want to hire is somebody that's already in media. A good example might be a reporter or a news anchor from a station, because they don't make a lot of money, but they're great people and they know everybody. And you want to have that person that can say, I can reach out to the reporters at the papers in Houston, in Dallas, in Austin, in whatever the sphere is, and get to know them and do more social media. And that's kind of where everybody lives now, right? Like it or not. So who's your social media person? That's what they're doing. They're just posting this stuff every day. And the idea of having somebody at BEDC, if I were the PIO or I was the communications person, I want to meet with mayor and council so I can, through our website, talk about what's going on at the city. I mean, we're the economic development group. We need to talk about things that are going on here, city manager, all this good stuff. They're just the good news person. That's all they do. You guys deal with bad news, okay? They deal with good news. Anything else?
I just want to say great job. I love the broad input that you got, and yeah, it was very balanced, very well done.
I appreciate it. One of the things to Jen's point, I'm going to meet with staff tomorrow. We're going to send this out, but also I'm going to meet with them to, Jen, your question. What can we do now? What can we do now? How can we chip away at this elephant and start to incorporate this in? So over the next number of months, you go, remember that? Yes, we're already doing that. We're doing these things here. I mean, maybe some of these even work into questions when you're, at least for this body, hiring a CEO. Maybe these work into the search, because with your permission, it's not a private document, it's public, is I was going to send it to Todd and say, hey, Todd, maybe think about how would you incorporate some of these into your questions for the candidates? Because if I'm the candidate, and I hate meeting with city managers, gee, you're probably not the person for us, right? You need a little bit more open collaboration. So if you guys are good with that, I'll send it on to him also, okay? Okay. If we're wrapped up there real quick, and then I will step away. So update on the executive search. I understand, I think today you might approve the job profile. Once you do that, and that gets to Todd, then the next steps, he's already sent me kind of a spreadsheet here. They'll finalize the job profile. They're actually, next week, if this is finalized, they'll start the networking, researching, proactive recruitment, advertising, screening candidates. You all will receive a doodle poll either from Bonnie Garraway, which is Todd's person, or Angela, one or the other, a doodle poll to start scheduling some first round, second round interview meetings. Those are probably going to take place at the end of August, around that time frame. And the idea is to, about the mid part of September, to have a candidate that's been offered a position, background checks, all those other things, and by mid or late September have somebody on board. And I don't know the timing of the city manager. If I recall, I think that's kind of around the same timing as the city manager search. I don't have the background on that, okay? So this is moving forward. Next step is for you guys to approve the profile, and then once that happens, the floodgates open and the search is officially launched. Okay? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, guys.
All right. We're now going to move on to 3.4, receive a presentation by Kimley Horn Engineering regarding the findings of the Corix wastewater study.
Good evening, Board. Thank you all for your patience and getting this final report back to you guys. And I just wanted to introduce the team really quick. We have the Kimley Horn team as well as Corix here with us today. And we have Sean Mason and Sierra Jensen with Kimley Horn, and then Scott Holstrom with Corix. So they are here to present the final findings.
Well, good evening. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about this. As Gene mentioned, I'm Sean Mason with Kimley Horn & Associates. I've been with them about 15 years doing primarily water and wastewater type planning and design. So it's my pleasure to talk to you about that tonight. Wanted to give a shout out to Gene and their team at Bedc. They've been a great partner on this project. So we've really appreciated the opportunity working with them, as well as the city staff. Trey and Paul both have been great partners and providing input into the study, as well as Scott and John from Corix. And with that, I'll dive into it. So on the agenda for tonight, wanted to cover these three main topics, location and purpose, a brief overview on the analysis, and then kind of get into the capital improvement plan that we identified. Digging into that, so basically what you see here is the service area that we identified in West Bastrop. It's outlined in black. Basically, it's kind of roughly bounded by Pope Bend on the west, Highway 21 and the city limits on the south, and then FM 20 on the east, and then it generally kind of follows 71, the Colony, and the Colorado River. And it's generally in the service area of Corix and then the city. The eastern portions of it are the city limits. And so really the purpose of this was to look for opportunities to partner regionally on wastewater infrastructure to basically bring the cost down and provide effective ways of serving this area that's generally not served at this time. As we all know, Central Texas is seeing a lot of growth right now, and so there's a lot of pressure in this area, and oftentimes the implementation of wastewater infrastructure can be one of the factors that limits or pushes development in certain directions, and especially in this area. And so when you take a regional approach, there's a couple key benefits that you can see. You can utilize existing capacities between the two partners. Like for instance, the city has a brand new plant that they may have existing capacity, and so you can share costs and look for efficiencies there. And then you can, get economies of scale when you partner on regional facilities. And so those are some of the benefits we saw. And then also the city is a real important partner, especially with Corix, because a large part of this is covered by an interlocal agreement between the county and the city. And so they actually have platting authority in parts of Corix's service area. And so I think, this is a good opportunity to get them together to partner and look to the future and work collectively towards common goals for wastewater infrastructure. Diving into the analysis, there's three main components when we're looking at how do we identify wastewater flows and infrastructure. The first part is we look at the natural drainage basins and how the wastewater collects, and that's basically the most efficient way to provide a wastewater system is with a gravity system following the natural drainage channels. And so that's an important way to have an efficient system. And then once we've kind of got those basins, we look at land use. And so really on this study, we looked at what were some existing developments and what areas were already kind of developed, and we kind of removed those from the study and really focused on the developable land in that area. And then we kind of, part of this is in the county, and so there's limited zoning and control over the land use, and so we looked at kind of a simplified land use approach for the area since there's not as much control as you would have in the city limits for the portion in Corix service area. And then the last component is you look at what area we're going to serve, what we think is going to be there in the future, and then how fast do we think it's going to grow. And so from that, we looked at basically a combination of city, county, Texas Water Development Board, and census data to look at kind of the growth rate for the area in the county and the city and arrived at a consensus there. And so basically, we then looked at a kind of a planning window, basically starting from about 2024 to 2045, so a little bit over a 20-year planning window in the future because there isn't a lot of infrastructure there, so we kind of gave ourselves a couple years to get caught up and then basically from there planned out. And that's basically how we looked at the analysis and the growth of the sewer. And from there, all that really lends itself to a capital improvements plan. And so that's what I've kind of got outlined here. You see that there's different basins, like I was talking about, beginning on the left, the basins are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through 10. And if you look at generally how I was talking about the flow of the basins, generally basins 1 through 6 are flowing from north to south towards Cedar Creek. A lot of the, like 10 is basically going towards the city's plant, 7's going back up towards the Colorado, and then 9 is kind of going up towards the north, towards the Colorado River, as well as 8 as well. But basically the majority of the big developable area is in those basins 1 through 6, and that's all kind of coming down towards Cedar Creek. And so we looked at, based on those growth rates, what kind of sewer flows we thought were going to be in the area. And from there, we kind of provided some preliminary sizings for, interceptors. And so, like, if you look at the different color of items here, we also identified a lot of the regional plants through the area. So the purple dots in the top are some of Corex's existing wastewater facilities, from treatment plants to lift stations. And then there's the colony of the areas in red, which has their own wastewater treatment plant. And then the city's infrastructure is kind of shown in orange down in the bottom right, though. And those were the kind of the existing locations of plants. And so there's really nothing kind of in that Cedar Creek area. And so that's where a lot of the recommendations are based off of. If you see, sometimes the interceptors don't go all the way to the top of the basins, and that's really because a lot of those areas are already kind of developed and have 2-acre single-family tracts. Yeah. Point right there. Oh, beautiful. Ooh, technology. Technology. Yeah, no, that's great. I see, okay. Perfect. Well, that's a little bit late, but apologies on that on my part. I should have known better. But so the interceptors are shown basically going down to the lettered facilities, and we've kind of left it broad on the facilities. Like we've said that, they could be a wastewater treatment plant, they could be the start of an interceptor going to a regional type plant, depending on how things develop out in that area, or they could be a lift station. And so there's different cost scenarios provided in the report that kind of cover some of those different varieties, because it really depends on where the land develops in those areas. And then we've also identified some areas like highlighted in green where we think there could be some, a regional Corex wastewater treatment plant that in the future you could kind of consolidate some of those flows into a larger facility instead of having a lot of smaller facilities. And then also we looked at areas of like partnership outside of the system or the study area. And so you see some of those alignments in blue. Those are some projects that we've discussed with the city where they might be putting in an interceptor that we could connect to in the future to provide, different infrastructure and connectivity between Corex and the city and partner in those areas. And then generally, like the preferred area development kind of tends to be towards the bottom of those basins where those facilities are planned, and that gives you the most efficient way to build out those systems. But as we know, we have limited control over where developers decide to develop. And with that, I think, just to reiterate, development should be encouraged to follow this plan where it's applicable and apply and look for land dedication in those areas where we might want regional facilities or different facilities. I think a big part of this was, working on collaboration between the city and Corex and how they do this, serve in this area together in partnership. And so I think, the meetings we've had have been a good way to connect that. And in fact, we're already seeing some progress. That, I believe Corex and the city have talked about some developments that, potentially Corex would be the retail provider and the city could potentially be the wholesale provider. So I already see some of that partnership working. And with that, I'd take any questions. I feel like I breezed through that, so I apologize. But if any questions or comments or discussion?
Well, while my eyesight is not that great, it seems. Okay. If I see the map correctly, if you can go back to where your main, that map right there, where the majority of your triangles are, which would be your wastewater plants, right?
Potentially, yeah. Like it just depends.
Right,
because
that's where the gravity flow is, and that makes the most common
Absolutely.
sense. So, what is the main highway right there? Is that Highway 20 with offshoots coming off of like 535 and 812 and that kind of?
I believe so. So 21 is right here.
Okay.
And then 71 is up here. So that's a lot of the Cedar Creek is kind of more down towards 21 in terms of where like the bottom of the basin would be.
So, when you do this study, because everybody in the county right now pretty much has to go with septic. There's nothing out there, right? So, is it your intention to help drive some of the development down there so that the new builders, if they want to build, 500 to 1,000 homes or something, they may actually have the ability to offer wastewater instead of septics. Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And in fact, we had some conversations with the county, because I think that's a really important part to mention, is that, a lot of this, like the area is driven to septic basically because of their rules. And so, I think that's an important part that we've been working with Gene and other to kind of coordinate with them and talk with them about, the feasibility of changing some of the rules in that area. And that's also why the city's Zone A is important, because the city has plating authority in there too. And in the report, I've got a map of where those areas are. Does that make sense, or did I answer your question?
No, it makes sense. I'm just kind of putting a developer hat on and going, okay, that's, I don't know how many years away that would be.
Yeah.
But, maybe 5 or 7 years. I mean, I really don't know.
And we talked about that in the report, that, this is kind of the most efficient towards that 2045 build out, that, ultimately development will come in where development is. And so there might be some interim solutions. And so maybe, people are building a package plant further up those lines than we'd want them to initially, but we're going to plan for some of those interceptor sizing through their development. And in the future, you might plan to connect that to a regional plant as you try and reduce the number of plants. And in fact, the state's pushing most utilities towards that direction, towards regionalization and not having a lot of different plants scattered throughout.
Okay. I mean, right now we have 3 kind of large developments going on, 1209, the Colony, you've got on 304, and then you've got, on 20, I believe, is their newer one, close to Shiloh Road.
And we actually, we have a map that's part of the study that kind of shows where a lot of those developments were that already had kind of plans in the work and infrastructure plans, and kind of pulled them out because they're already doing their own thing and had figured out in a different way. And so we did quite a bit of coordination with that.
Okay. But you wouldn't necessarily be looking at places that are already established to try to set up a wastewater treatment plant when people are already on septic or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think, especially like in those neighborhoods that already have like 2-acre lots, eventually they're going to want to get off septic. And I think, hopefully in 20 years we have more infrastructure closer to them, and that might be more of a, the economies of scale might make sense. And, if it's a few $1,000s versus millions of dollars to get sewer service, it might be worth, not going with a septic, which I think would be desirable for most folks in Bastrop County.
So, Chair Spencer, one thing that, just to make you aware of, CAPCOG, the Capital Area Council of Governments, they are part of administering the CBDG grants, which is the community development grants, block grants, and specifically, I was on the committee that did some of the, came up with what the points would be for projects, and they specifically added first-time water and wastewater because there is a goal to get counties off of those septic systems.
Yes.
TCEQ is going to be pushing for it, so federal grant money is going towards that. But it's more towards, to your point, that you're in a subdivision, you're on septic, you're super happy with your septic until you're not happy with your septic. But if there's infrastructure that's placed in your neighborhood, that you can apply for a grant to federally get assistance to get that person to attach to a treatment system. And that's a little bit harder to do because it becomes on a case-by-case basis, but there is very definitely a long-term push to not have folks on septic, period.
And that's, like I said,
that's a great idea. I mean, you have water, fresh water and wastewater, you're going to attract a lot of business there.
Absolutely.
That's what you need.
And it seems like there's been a few developers already asking about some of this too, so I think there's, potential and interest.
And to your point of package plant now, it's a whole lot easier to convert if you're already planning from the beginning that this is a package plant that you can get up and operating in a fairly short amount of time, but it's not going to be a package plant forever because it's ultimately going to go to an interceptor. It's going feed into a lift station, whatever. That's the beauty of having this study.
Yeah, and I think, where you really see the benefit is where you plan ahead on some of these infrastructure sizing and locations and getting land now, getting easements now, getting, pipelines the right size. It might cost $1 million to put it like a mile of 8-inch now, and it might be $100,000 to $200,000 to upsize it, but if you had to come back and replace it with a 15, you'd be spending millions. So, I mean, like you find one or a few of those projects and the planning, pays for itself like tenfold easy. So, all right.
So just one quick question. Is this at a point now where we can share it with developers who are interested?
I
or
believe so. I
do we-
believe it is on
there-
the website is where it's basically intended to be published on BDC's website.
Okay.
Is that right, Gene? Yes. Call me a liar if I am. So. So I believe they have a PDF that they can upload there for developers to look at, or any interested party. So, well, excellent. Thank you for your time. Any other questions? Y'all have a great night. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. That's good stuff. Okay, with that, we will move on to 3.5, receive presentation from city staff regarding the broadband feasibility study.
Hello, Board. Thank you again for funding our broadband feasibility study. As you know, we did enter into an agreement with Schneider Engineering to perform that study. They provided a first draft of that report to the City Council on May the 12th, and we have preliminarily captured some of those project recommendations and built them into our current draft CIP. You guys saw that draft CIP at a prior meeting. Our consultant, Schneider Engineering, is represented by Mr. Lance Pettigrew, and he will give you a most recent update to that feasibility study for your consideration and feedback. Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you tonight to talk about this broadband feasibility study. And so I've got a lot of information I'm going to try to go through quickly, but so I think you all know, or maybe you know what the purpose of this was. Broadband is on everybody's mind these days, probably exasperated a little bit by the pandemic that we're trying to quit talking about. We can talk about this post-PC, post-COVID days, but symptoms and things that were going on in the general public as far as broadband goes were uncovered during the pandemic. Finding out how maybe inequitable or how unavailable broadband access was, really mostly related to what we heard in the news about our students that were having to work from home and trying to learn from home, and other things that drove this. So it's a conversation that's being had at the national level. Also at the state level, the state of Texas has formed a broadband office to study and look at how best to make sure that the citizens of the state of Texas have access to broadband. So the slides that follow, I'm going to try to unpack a little bit of what's in the study, even though I think there's a lot of information in there. So bear with me on that. I thought maybe we would go through a series of questions to try to unpack the information that's in there. First of all, the first two questions on this list are really fundamental to the rest of the study and things that we're in the process of discussing and trying to answer. Is broadband an essential service? Is it really something that, just like water service and electric service, is it something that's a fundamental necessity? It's a good question to ask and a good question to debate. And then the other question that the sense was that we tried to look at on another level was, are we underserved? Is Bastrop and Bastrop County underserved with broadband service? Out of that, we're going to cover these other areas. What can we do about it? What can the city do about the fact that we might be underserved? And can we really build a network? We had some serious regulatory questions to look at. What's it going to look like? And if we're going to do feasibility, we need to know how we might build it and what it's going to cost. So we'll get through those, and I'll answer some questions for you at the very end. So the first one that's kind of fundamental to all of it is broadband essential? You can read online and look at newspapers around the state and look at the state office, but this particular article that I pulled out to parse out of the Texas Tribune, it says millions of Texans still don't have broadband service. Although much attention is given to the lack of just the infrastructure, but large numbers of people, even in urban areas, still don't have access to broadband. There are 2 points out of this article that I highlighted and clipped. One of them, is it available and reliable? Two questions, or two things that were postulated out of this article, saying that, really not only does it have to be there or be available on the street, is it a reliable form of service? So that's one question that the state's seeking to answer. But then this says there are really three elements to looking at broadband that we have to solve. One of them, is it available? Is it reliable, and can they pay for it? And the last one is, do they know how to use it? Well, knowing how to use it, I can't answer that. But we're going to look at availability of it and affordability of it, which is the last piece of the article that I clipped out of here, was that we heard story after story about people that went home during the pandemic and they couldn't afford their internet. And so in order for kids to get schooling, they went outside of McDonald's to get Wi-Fi hotspots in order to communicate and do schoolwork, or they would go outside the other places that had far-reaching free Wi-Fi hotspots. So really, is it essential? I don't know that there's a whole lot of argument that can know that economic opportunity for citizens and for businesses that might want to come to areas that might be of interest to the Economic Development Council. You've got to have reliable and affordable internet. So the next question is, are we underserved? In the city of Bastrop, there was a Connected Nations study that the county did, which had some interesting data points in it. 90% of the Bastrop's households have access to 25 megabit download speeds, 3 megabit upload speeds of internet. That was an interesting point that we tried to process and wonder what to do with. But if you look at the second bullet point in the slide, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, in their assessment of what does it mean to have access to broadband, is actually up the standard. They say an area is underserved if you have less than 100 megabit download speeds and upload of 20 megabit speeds. That's the new standard in the state, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's what they're gauging underserved areas by. So when we looked at the rest of the study and looked at the rest of the data, those are the trigger points that we used. So by the PUC standards, the city of Bastrop is considered underserved by the data that we have on subscription rates. That's the data point that we have. Now, we've had some questions from the council, and Councilman Kirkland had some good points that we're going to take next steps to look at better refining that data so we can answer that question. So this is a real still fundamental debate, is the city of Bastrop underserved? And so we're going to seek to answer those in the coming days, but we appreciate his feedback on that. So more data out of the Connected Nations survey findings. Average internet speed in Bastrop County is 23 meg down, 9 meg up. 23% in the county do not have internet service due to cost and availability. And then there's some other percentages. The residents said their service does not meet their needs. 61% of households that were surveyed, 77% in agricultural. County businesses, about half. So some pretty interesting statistics that the respondents to the survey said they were dissatisfied with what they had. Finally, last slide on the nation's survey was the cost basis. Average cost of internet service to the residents for high speed that we found in the survey was, they found in the survey was $81 a month. In more rural areas, it was $94. And then residents that responded that wanted more options, 91%. So as we talked about that, and Councilman Kirkland had questions about that, I mean, there's some more information, some more data that we probably need from that. But this is just data out of the survey. So it is what it is. So the analysis there says an urgent need for more high-speed internet options in Bastrop County. So are we underserved? This survey seems to point to that fact. What can we do about it? Well, the basis of this study was to look at a municipally owned fiber optic network. The city could construct a fiber network throughout the service territory. And in the way that the rest of the study is going to present this, we're going to talk in terms of middle mile fiber, last mile fiber. And so I want to explain a little bit about what that is. Middle mile fiber really is everything up to the service from right outside of your home into the home. So if you think about your electric service, or your water meter service. From the water meter or the transformer and electric meter down would be last mile electric service, last mile water service in terms of the broadband networks as an analogy. So last mile is just the service drops. Middle mile is everything right around the city. So as we look at the rest of the study and the feasibility and cost, that's the distinction. So we broke this up into 2 phases of just pure infrastructure investment, and one involves really getting into the internet service business, which was a phase 3 option that we presented. So besides just basic internet services, there are other benefits to building a connected city, a fiber optic based city, and there are. Distribution automation, everything related to self-healing electric networks, restoring power quickly, automating breakers that operate, gathering data from those breakers, just improving the reliability of the city electric network. All of those things can be handled with better communications, better data from those devices on the network. Future traffic management. Traffic management is getting more sophisticated these days, all enabled by fiber optics that can feed data back and help interoperate the city. Smart city applications, Internet of Things. Everything in our house these days is coming with some sort of internet device. Refrigerators, I bought a refrigerator 2 months ago in Home Depot, and you can punch on a touch screen on the refrigerator and get your Instacart full and have the groceries delivered. I mean, you can do that with almost any new appliance, I think. Any Internet of Things is just anything that can have a smart card in it, a smart communications. Fiber and communications networks can enable that. And energy management, we've gone through various series of iterations of two-way meter systems, automatic metering infrastructure. It gives us some optics or some data into what we're consuming on a monthly basis. As we get more batteries in our homes, as we get more solar panels on our rooftops, having better energy management data for both the electric utility and for the consumer, all facilitated by being connected. So yes, there are more reasons than just getting your YouTube or Netflix related to internet service. And can we really build it? This is the regulatory question that we sought to answer. Texas has been very clear in recent days that cities and utilities can install and operate fiber networks. Recently, they've updated the codes, administrative codes, to make it very clear that cities can do this, can install dark fiber or lit fiber for that matter, and be in the internet service business should they choose to. And there's the same clause in there about underserved areas, which 80% don't have access to 100 megabit download speeds. And in terms of internet service providers, there is a case study where City of Mont Belvieu, Texas, located near Houston, actually entered the ISP business. They were taken to court over that, saying that they did not have a right to compete in the internet service business. And the study's not trying to argue whether that's the right thing to do or not, but the point is that there's, not only as the legislature has fixed or made a statement that you can build fiber networks, but if you choose to operate it as an ISP, there's case law that says that there is a success story that says if you choose to go all that way, regulatory-wise, you can do that. So what would the network look like? We talked a lot about middle mile fiber in this diagram. I'm going to see if I can play. This is the button. Is this the button I'm supposed to use for the highlighter? Yes. Aha. All right. So the middle mile fiber really goes from these two, in between these 2 points. Over here on this side of the diagram, the internet, we have to connect the fiber up to operate in the internet, but when we talk about middle mile fiber, we're talking about the poles and wires in your city and the underground connections that are through the neighborhoods, all the way up to the point where we have a demarc. So when we talk about middle mile, we're not talking about putting a router in everybody's home or business. We're really talking about building this middle mile backbone infrastructure to facilitate providing ubiquitous internet to the public. So to get some idea of some financial picture, we had to pick an area to do this in. These two maps that are here, I know they're a little small for you, but the one on the left of the picture is actually the ETJ, the 1 mile ETJ, as we say, that we clouded in, that we used to base the concept design on. You can see the red diagram there, the red lines on there. To encompass the 1 mile ETJ, we proposed that as a fiber ring. That's the backbone ring that we would build. The rest of the middle mile would be distribution. The map on the right really adds to that and adds the electric utility meters that are in the city, and that's these dark magenta dots. So the dark magenta shows where the city has current electric service, and the rest of it's ETJ, where there might be another electric utility. But the ETJ, I don't need to tell you about ETJ. So that's the maps that we use to overlay and lay the concept design on. So out of that map, we came up with 142 miles of overhead fiber design, 34 miles of underground design to build out the middle mile to the city. That included so many pole attachments. So this is the basis of the financial model that we built. That's the number of electric meters. What's it going to cost? This is of interest, I know. How much would it cost for us to do this? And this is just a preliminary cost estimate based on data that we have from recent fiber networks that were built in other parts of the state that we are working with. So if you keep in mind, again, there's a phase one, there's a backbone ring, which is the fundamental. We have to build a ring before we build anything else. The rest of it's a distribution network, and the rest of it's service drops. So if we can keep that straight, the next slides will make sense. Building a backbone ring of 288 strands of fiber around the perimeter service territory is going to cost around $2 million. We believe that's conservative because we had to make some assumptions about a number of poles that had to be changed out. As if this is something that you choose to do, that'll be refined. But we believe this is a conservative estimate to build the fiber backbone. Phase two would be all of the streets off of the ring, the collector streets, all the residences and businesses around the city, 1 mile ETJ. A little bit more expensive. There's 34 miles of underground network that has to be built, which is the reason this is so expensive. That's very costly to install in existing neighborhoods where there's underground. So you can see that's over half of the distribution network, but 176 miles at a smaller count, 96 strands. Just because we saw that as being so expensive, we looked at a hybrid model that we could reduce the cost. We think that there's maybe some opportunity to partner with some other ISPs and maybe not build fiber to the home. We could use some existing coax networks. As long as we got the fiber closer to the home, coax can handle a lot of bandwidth. It's just all distance dependent and electronics dependent. There's a lot that goes into that. So we just did this as a scenario. Hey, what if we kind of took out the biggest cost data and worked a plan? So this is just feasibility estimates. Keep that in mind. This isn't anything to go write a business plan or a check on. The phase 3 estimate was the most surprising, and maybe it shouldn't be, but this just for the infrastructure piece, it was almost $8 million to build service drops to all of the meters that were on the model for that. So 7,934 meters. We made an assumption about bandwidth cost, but the other two service drops in the central networks we think are pretty good estimates for what it would cost to drop in service. On top of that, you have to have customer service, phone call answers, technical support. There's a lot of other factors that go into being an internet service provider that were outside of the scope of this particular study, but we just wanted to frame up the infrastructure piece of that and just show you that, show you what that might look like. So to build everything out and be an internet service provider from an infrastructure standpoint, we showed $22 million for everything. You know, again, we believe that's conservative, but we wanted to be conservative to show you what the cost would be. Phase 3 also has two options, like we talked about. You could build the last mile and self-deploy the internet for yourself, or you could just not do Phase 3. You just build Phase 1 and Phase 2 and let partner with an internet service provider and let them handle all the last drop service and provide the internet service for the consumers. There's some O&M expense in here that we don't need to go through in detail. You're going to have some city staff if you go into the internet service business. That goes without saying. You're going to have city staff if you have 200 miles of fiber that's under your ownership. Somebody's got to own that process and own that set of tasks in the city. So we just put some budget numbers together for staffing and a little bit for O&M expense. Those are in the study. Phase 2, again, we just have to have a couple more people when we build out to almost 200 miles of fiber and a little bit more O&M. You don't have to have a huge staff. You can outsource a lot of it, but somebody in the city has got to own that department. It's a new department, new line of work for you. Again, Phase 3, these are just preliminary estimates of what it might look like from just a staffing budget. Again, we don't have all of the customer service costs in there. This is really more infrastructure support.
Just a quick question on Phase 3. Is that on top of Phase 2? Phase 2 showed Phase 1 plus Phase 2? Phase 3 does not describe that.
Yeah, Phase 3 is independent of Phase 1 and Phase 2.
So it would be Phase 3 plus Phase 2?
If you did everything, yes, full. That's right. That's
correct. So you're $1 million, $1.5 million.
That's correct, yeah. All right. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. And so how should we pay for it? You know, it's a very good question. Well, first, you know, what is it really going to, we can do it with lease revenue. We think there are opportunities to partner with people. You got to partner with some ISPs to recover your costs. These were dollars that I pulled from some different parts of the country that published some lease rates. You know, for dedicated point-to-point connections, maybe you can get the upper end. I doubt it. It'd probably favor closer to the lower end. But I just wanted to put a range for a feasibility to give you an idea. If you're doing point-to-point connected networks between businesses, there's probably opportunity for more dollars. If you're doing wholesale, long or bundled services with ISPs, it's probably closer to the 20 for some feasibility. But anyway, this just gives you an idea of what a payback would be if you were to lease out of the 288 strands. I ratioed out 80 strands that might be an initial lease model. Again, just for discussion purposes. You know, you have to get into a next level of study and some discussions with people of what the real dollars might look like. This was just to give you an idea. The benefits and risks to Phase 1, just the ring. This is just the ring around the city. You can connect all the city facilities to it. You can maybe pick up some lease revenue to offset the cost. Maybe other reasons to build the $2 million ring for other connectivity and other community benefits. So it may not be completely dependent on lease revenue for that. The cons and risks, you know, maybe there's an overstatement of lease revenue. The Field of Dreams analogy I use, if you build it, will they come? Before you go to the bank and go build this, we have some conversations to have with providers to determine what that might look like with them. If you don't build any further than this, and if you just stop with this, you know, you might have some delay in opportunities for lease revenues if people don't build up fiber to the homes. So there's another gap. We're not really solving internet to everybody if we just build a ring and let everybody else do the rest of the work. So that's a con, I think. And then there's a staffing cost. That's always a con. If we have to have more staff, then we just need to talk about that, okay? So that's just if we build the ring. We don't really solve a lot of the problems if we just build a ring. That's step one, though. It's a building block. Step two, phase one and phase two. So we have a middle mile ring plus overhead and underground. This kind of gives you some of the same optics there, no pun intended, fiber, but 20 strands distribution network. That's just a less run up and down the streets. Maybe we don't need as many lit up, so it was a percentage of the bigger installation, a conservative estimate, I think. Some paybacks. The paybacks, if you had to lease all of it and make the business model work all on lease rates, it gets a little more difficult, particularly at the lower ends. If you cut out all the underground work and you get a decent lease rate, even on the low end of the lease rate, if you don't build underground network and you partner with an ISP for the last mile for coax, then if you get all of it leased, then it even looks better. And this is if you just lease 20% of the 96 strands that you might install. So if we not only build the ring, but we build the distribution network, I mean, some of these are the same. We get state-of-the-art middle mile infrastructure for more ubiquitous bandwidth closer to the home. So we can build it. We don't build the ring and leave it to everybody else. We actually get fiber closer to businesses and homes. We leverage existing ISPs to do this, partnerships with people that might want to come into the city that are not here already, to be able to offer a more competitive product, less expensive product. The city controls the speed of deployment after that. If you only build the ring and you don't do anything else, then you're waiting on somebody else to build fiber down the roads. So you control the speed. If you build it down the roads, it's closer. It's a little bit more advantageous for internet service providers to build the last mile and better the bandwidth. Again, it's the field of dreams analogy. We still need to drill down and find out, opportunities for partnerships and opportunities for people that can come and take advantage of the network that we build. And again, we're dependent on existing last mile ISPs and whether they'll do that. The revenue model, this was based on some competitive information. I know recently I just signed up for 500 meg internet at $45 a month, so this is not far off of a competitive rate for what's in other parts of the state for 500 meg down speeds. It may not be available here, but those are rates that could be realized for 500 meg. Anyway, it's depending on a subscription rate. We had to base it on something, so we said, well, if you have a 100% subscription rate, this is what it looks like, and knowing that's not real, we look at that and we just take a percentage of that, right? That's another way to get at a penetration rate. So we assessed of the 7,900, that's 100%. So if we believe 30% subscription rate, then it's 30% of whatever that's the only reason the 100% model's put in there. It's like, how much could we get if everybody subscribed? Okay, well, we know that's not going to case. That we assumed 40% subscription rate. We have some reason to believe where there's competition and firmer bandwidth than some folks are offering, that 40% as the microcells are being built is a realistic number with some other internet service providers that we know.
Just one quick question on the 40%. Is that 40% of the 10% that doesn't have service, or are you expecting some of the 90% that already has service just to throw their service out and jump on the city's?
I'm expecting some conversion, either dissatisfaction with the customer service. Maybe you can't get customer service. It's an assumption, but I can tell you.
But again, I just want to understand what that assumption. That's not 40% of the ones that aren't subscribed.
No.
You're talking about having to aggressively go in and capture and take market share away from multiple existing providers currently in order to make that work.
Or some of the existing providers jump on your network and offer a better service. I mean, so taking advantage of your service or your...
But Model 3 is end-of-line ISP, so you're
talking... that's right. No, you're right.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is that's 40%. That's actually going after an entire existing satisfied market, maybe at a lower rate.
Yeah.
But now you're going to go after taking market share away from existing companies that have been in this business for years.
That's exactly right.
Just wanted to make sure I knew what
No,
that
you
was.
got it. You
Okay.
hit it. You hit it, without a doubt.
Why is that something the city would want to get involved in?
What's that?
Why is that something the city would want to get involved in marketing?
I can't answer that.
It's not for him to answer.
Yeah, it had to be a part of the study so you can see what it is. I don't, you know, I had to put it out there because to give you the whole picture, this is what it looks like, okay? There's a lot, well, you'll see in a slide coming up, partially what that looks like. But anyway, I looked at just some market price discussion of some things we gleaned from the area, pricing that was available on the internet, and looking at bandwidth of technologies. I mean, coax in short distances can provide pretty high-speed bandwidth. Fiber definitely is the best, but fixed wireless, you know, lower. There's some satellite options that are coming available in the market that are promising better bandwidths. You know, still early to get some data on that, but there are those options available. But here's the pricing look from what's out there, and based on what we're seeing, you know, if your city has these guaranteed bandwidths, and or you can provide them at a lower cost for some of your residents, something to look at.
But those up and down, those download and up rates are what the provider's saying they're giving, but then the Connected Nations survey, people are saying that's not what they're getting, right? So that's the...
There's a disconnect there because, well, this is what they advertise on the pricing, and so whether it's not available or whether they can't afford it or whether they buy it and the bandwidth, you know, it's all in the advertisement. Up to 25 megs or up to 100 megs for X price. You know, you need to verify that you're actually getting that, and then I think sometimes at peak periods you're probably not getting as much as you'll notice the latency goes up. If everybody's downloading at the same time, the up to becomes tomorrow when nobody else is downloading. So
Yeah,
But the Connected Nations survey, when you did that survey, it tested and did actual at the time as a part of the survey. So those are, you know, from a Connected Nations standpoint, that's an actual data point.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right, and what most people, businesses especially, are experiencing is that the more people that get on the fiber network, if they have their own direct line that they share with the multi-building application, you're not ever going to get a gig down and a gig up. It's just not going to happen. So the more people that are on it, the less speed that you have. That's just the way it is.
And that has to do with the technologies and the topologies, right? I mean, it's a distance from where you switch, and it's a distance to where you multiplex, and it becomes shared. So, you know, what you get, I mean, you know, we've all experienced, you know, the spinning wheel, and we think we have plenty of bandwidth. You know, we're not getting it. So that's all a part of the subject of how do we, you know, how do we make sure that we're getting the best bandwidth and
So the intent of the service is to provide city residents with this capability. However, the survey...
You need to turn on your mic or no one at home can hear you.
So the intent of the study actually took into account the county numbers, but we're actually just looking to provide service to city and, you know, around the city, not
City and
actually
ETJ.
be a provider
Yeah.
to the county of Bastrop.
the city and ETJ.
Right. So, but we're not looking to be a provider of the county of Bastrop.
That's, you know, that's up to,
Well, the reason I was asking is the survey that you mentioned actually was mixing county numbers in with city.
that's correct.
Okay, so.
That's correct.
That's one question I had. And then in terms of the service territory then, again, the fiber is the city and the ETJ, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so with that in mind, AT&T and Spectrum already provide these services, right?
They do. I don't know how they're reliable. I don't know if they're fiber to the home. I don't know
Yeah,
what
it's fiber
bandwidth they
in the
provide to
colony.
the home.
It's fiber in the colony.
I don't think that the service to the colony is representative of the service to all of the county. It's hence the
That's what I was
connected
asking.
nations.
So to the county or to the city? So, so in terms of the city not having fiber, I understand that. But, you know, city has fiber? All right.
So that was one of the questions that we're going to seek to help answer in the days ahead too. I mean, there's a, you know, we want to close a gap in perception and what's there. So we were going to seek out some more data to help us do. That's one of the steps that we talked with Councilman Kirkland on, that we'd like to shore up a little bit more before you go write a check to do something that that you may or may not need to do. So,
And the survey data is July of 2020. And so that's 6 months into COVID. So when we talk about post-COVID, there was more than 18 months of additional scrambling, accommodating, adjusting, grants, providing services and others to people. So, you know, when you look at new technology going forward, the speed of adaptation as well as the keeping up and both the cost of keeping up that technology, which is not in any of the estimates. There's nothing about upgrades. So it's literally just put it in one time and that's it. I don't see any estimate of 10% or 15% of profits reserved for future upgrades, switchgear upgrades or switching upgrades and so forth. It's just put it in once and let it rip. The other part that I look at is when we look at estimates, you said they're conservative, plus or minus what percent are at this point? I mean,
I'd say they could be as much as 20% high.
So plus 0, minus 20?
From feedback I'm getting is they're high. They're conservative.
Okay. Never seen a phase 1 estimate at plus 0 on any capital project,
Well.
but okay. The other part is when you talked about smart meters and all these great things that are going to come, what about, you know, companies like Bluebonnet who have been in this business in terms of power? They've got all the smart meters. They're already doing all this, but they're not running fiber optics to my ranch house. So a lot of things that you've mentioned are already existing in the current power grid and don't require fiber optics to make it happen. The second one is traffic management. It's a great opportunity, but my question to the city is what new traffic department are we going to put in place in order to manage traffic results? Because it's not going to be, I know you don't have that answer, but when you have these things on, they don't come free. They're actually setting up another department that has to monitor, manage, oversee that 24/7. And then the other part that I look at is from the point of investment in terms of fiber optic, we're about 2 technologies behind at least. So, you know, I remember reading books about telegraph. I remember telephone coming out to the ranch and out to the community. In fact, in '83, they were still using party lines. Short, 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 long, long, short, long, long, which was, you know, coming from the Northeast, this was like a shock to me that that still existed. So I know that some of that's behind. Coaxial's already run. Fiber optic is already here and established. And so what this is an investment in third back generation technology where automatic mobile and mobile transit communicating with hotspots and all of that, having nothing tied, and as you mentioned, Starlink or satellite based, those are already out there being developed. So essentially the 2 newest technologies that are really growing are well ahead of the one that's being proposed to be invested in, which would be fiber optic. So again, something for us to consider. We're investing in the old technology, the older technology, at the back end of everybody else that's already invested in the region. At 90% coverage and 77% coverage for the county, 90% coverage for the city. So it's a tough sell.
So I understand. So to your point about, you know, older technology, I mean, fiber is still the best way. And all of the 5G networks have fiber backhauls. They're not complete wireless solutions. The only ones that are really wireless, Starlink, you know, we've heard a lot about Starlink and it's in the early stages. Yeah. So HughesNet, it's not very, yeah, it's not there yet. So fiber is still the state-of-the-art bandwidth provider, connection provider for reliable, stable bandwidth. And so old technology, yes, fiber's been around for a long time, but fiber's going to be here for a long time to come.
Okay.
So.
And then another question, last one I've got so far. The 2022 Texas Controller's report on broadband study already granted the LCRA the rights to build both the middle mile and the backhaul. How does that incorporate in the study in terms of what LCRA is doing? Because we're in an LCRA area covered by that already, so they've already been granted this right by the state. So how does that affect this?
So we're very aware of that, and actually the preliminary concept design takes into account connecting to LCRA fiber backhaul near their substations. The fiber ring was designed. We know them well, and we know what their mission is and their fiber, and so they have fixed them being able to partner with cities to expand their broadband or use their backhaul broadband that's on most of their transmission lines today. So that the study was based on putting interconnects right at LCRA substations.
So then are there costs or charges to connect back into LCRA's backbone?
It's in the proposal.
It wasn't spelled out, but you've got those costs?
It's in the cost. There are some fiber huts, we call them, which we're calling demarc places that we put some cross-connect technology there. Yes, sir.
I have a question myself. Your market analysis starts off with the statement, overall, the city of Bastrop is well connected, considering that 89.5% of households have broadband internet subscription. And by federal standards of the 25 megabits down and 3 up, it's already being covered. So I guess if that's a true statement, which I believe it to be, and if we're talking about an improvement of that and maybe expanding it somewhat, why aren't the Spectrum and the ATs and other ISP folks, why aren't they rushing in to do this? If it's in such high demand, and the reason I say high demand because you have stated it's generally believed that we have insufficiency in it, which would lead me to believe there must be a high demand for it. If there's a high demand for it, why aren't private companies rushing in to get this completed?
That's a very good question. I don't know that I have all the answers to it, so you have 25.3. I think that's pretty clear, and I think that it's evidence that there is some connectivity. But the new standard is 120, 100 download, 20 up, and so that was a standard that we based to say that the city was underserved. Is that economics? Is that availability? I think those are questions that we haven't fully answered yet.
Okay.
So I think it is remarkable that a lot of folks have 25.3, but the new standard's 120.
Okay, and I'm assuming you're doing this with a lot of different municipalities and whatnot, or that your firm is doing a lot of work for a lot of other folks. With apparently a whole lot of grants and federal money out there and billions of dollars out there, it would seem to me that the majority of folks, municipalities, would be going out to try to get those grants and that kind of funding. Are you seeing that as a predominant way of financing something along these lines?
Absolutely. They're interested in the infrastructure bill money and going after that money to help fund these projects. We do work for a lot of cities around the state and a lot of co-ops, and so the co-ops are looking. We know a few co-ops that are building fiber networks. Their case is a little bit more difficult. There's less density there, but they're doing it because there's a need to serve their folks. And
so, Chair Spencer, it's worth noting that we'll have a new state senator on January 1st, and it's Senator Shortner. and he is the chair of the Senate Committee on Business and Commerce, and that's broadband falls under that. So I had that conversation with him. There is a hearing at the end of the month because there is, I believe the technical term is, well, I can't say that word. There is a tremendous amount of federal money that's becoming available for this. And so I had conversations with him about what's your plans for it? How do we get access to it? What's the right thing to do with it? Because some of what we're talking about, for one thing, it's the 25.3 change into the 120, which is like a whole nother, that's not last year. Right? That you will certainly notice if you're at 100. And then the other part of it is, I know for myself, you only have one choice. So when you only have one, I only have one person that I can buy, that I can get broadband from at my house. So if you only have one choice, then they pretty much get to set that price. And from a private standpoint, they do the number analysis. If I put in this much line, there's this many lots, there's this many connections, I can charge this rate for it, and yes, it makes sense. So sometimes the issue becomes even just having at one point there was a discussion, there's some cities that become like the supplier of last resort, where you're not trying to compete, but you're trying to give them enough of a connection that they can do homework. And maybe they can't play whatever the latest video game is with 27 of their friends at the same time, but is there a reasonable basic service rate and basic service? And I believe that's why it's the point of there could really be a win-win-win to try to improve service and availability. And as we talk about our city limits and our ETJ, we know there are several hundred acres in our ETJ that are have development agreements and are plan on becoming a part of the city, and so that becomes, and that's a whole lot easier when it's a brand new area. That's so right. It's not like I don't believe the intention of the feasibility report was waking up and saying we want to be the next ISP provider and compete with well-established businesses, but there is. To the private point, when it doesn't make sense for private, it does make sense that every citizen deserves a utility that used to be considered a luxury that now we know is very much a necessity, particularly from a school education point of view, and quite frankly, for some businesses to be able to function and to give them the opportunity. So there's kind of there's a bigger picture out there that's being looked at, but I did think it was worth mentioning Senator Schwertner and things that are will be going on with the next legislation.
That's great, and thank you very much for the update. That's good to know, because we all hear about all this money that is starting to become available, and yes, it is a very big subject that people talk about, and it would seem to me that most municipalities would try to go after as much federal money as possible to make things like this happen, to give the options that you're talking about. I just have one other question, and it's just more curious. When I read the Texas utility codes, maybe I'm reading it wrong, so maybe you can help me just better understand it. It basically says that a municipal electric system that is a member of a municipal power agency is allowed to lease any of the excess capacity, right? So that's the only thing that we can do is lease the excess capacity. So is that the sheer size or the amount that we can offer out in this backbone is just the unused portion of what we already have?
Do you want to interpret vagueness in the code?
I'm trying to read I do a lot of stuff with code at my work, and it's like.
I think it's intentionally vague, right? Because, if you put it up and you're going to use a strand or two for the city and 94 strands as excess capacity. So I think that it's intentionally vague to give municipalities the opportunity to take advantage of their distribution system.
Okay. I think there's a lot more of information that needs to be forthcoming, and I'm glad that the the city councilman Kirkland is asking for more information because we definitely need it.
Yeah, look, so this was not intended to tell you to go get in the ISP business. It was there to show you that this is you see my cons and risks. I mean, it's a high-risk thing to do that. So the study was not presented to tell you to go write a check to do that. It's just to, if we can assess that there is a need, an underserved need, which is like I started off the presentation, that's a fundamental question that we need to answer. We're going to get more data on that. Then as a city, you've got to decide how do you meet that need. I mean, or if you have a role to play in that need. Those are two fundamental policy questions that you've got to address. And so, you know, unequal bandwidth, you know, we've defined that. Not having enough bandwidth, not being affordable, how do we resolve those? If it's on the pole and it's $125 a month, is that affordable? I think those are questions that the study doesn't seek to answer. Really, the point is that if we sense and we determine that there is a need or a need not being met by having access to growing bandwidth needs in the city, there are opportunities that the city can take advantage of for yourself, independent of offering it to your citizens, and then the rest of it you just have to decide. That's the reason for the study, is that, hey, this is if you did this, the worst case economics are on the board. If you can get infrastructure money, then when you have the decision to go, people will talk to you and they will help take advantage of that to provide levels of service to your citizens that I think that we've determined already that's necessary. That's the whole point of the study. So if we look at this new complete line of business, if you were to be an ISP, that's a real risk that you're not in that business, and it's a fully mature business in the market today. So Mont Bellevue is only one success story. So before you dive into that and you get excited about that, one of the recommendations is make sure we do a full pro forma of that so you know what the costs and risks are. That's not what this study was about. So the funding things, we talked about public partnerships. It's an economic development project in some sense, a community development project, which is the reason I think we're presenting it today for you to think about and join in the debate as to what's the right for the city. Bonds, you can certainly bond it. Grants, the infrastructure bill, we talked a lot about that, going after grant money. The state's got available grant money. I think that we prove up the need and go after some grant money and decide what you do with it. So the summary, based on the data that we have to date, obviously there's some holes that we're going to fill, but the data looks like there's an unmet need in the city, and we want to prove that up, to make sure that we're sure of that. Building middle mile has some reasonable return just in the models. If it's all about return on investment and not about solving a public need, then those data points are in there to look at. If you get grant funding, that changes the whole dynamic of anything I put in this feasibility study. So I think that's important to consider. And then it poses the greatest risk to be in the ISP business. So next steps, these are next steps that I put in the study for recommendation, and through talk with Councilman Kirkland, we have an interim step that we want to go through and gather some more data to answer those first two questions about are we underserved and is there a need? But once we get past those, maybe there's enough to do a little bit more refinement in the cost estimates with a preliminary design, more than just a 10,000-foot flyover in the design. Maybe at some level we'll get a little tighter, see what the cost estimates really look like. Explore partnerships. I think that's a high-level next step. We just need to talk. When we come with a project, people will talk to you. So I think, thinking about it and talking about it's one thing, but we go talk to people about the possibilities of improving connectivity in the city. That's important. Develop more detailed lease model. Those are competitive matters, so I just grabbed data off the internet. The final deal with a couple of different iterations may be significantly better than what we're showing. And then there's the prepare a full pro forma. I'll spit it out in a minute. If you really are excited about being an ISP, you really need a lot more detailed work in that. I think that that's a high-risk business, and we just put that in there. It was not a part of the scope. We put that in there because you just need to look at that, all of the bundles, all the way end to end. You need to see what you're getting into. So there have been a lot of good questions, and hopefully it's been helpful. I'm still here for other questions. Y'all probably have other business than talking to me, though. So whatever I can do to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
I believe you have a citizen's comment.
I'm getting to that. From the board, any other questions from the board? Okay, great. Listen, thank you very much. That was really interesting. Very good. All right, yes, we do have a question from Richard Smarzik. Yeah, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. You had a comment.
Good evening, Richard Smarzik, 925 Main Street, Bastrop, Texas. Just all cards on the table. I currently have Spectrum. I've got the gig. I've got 940 up. I'm 940 down, and 42 up. So I'm well served, right? This feasibility study, in my opinion, with the two-phase approach to doing a middle mile, is not a prudent investment. Their own market analysis shows that almost 90% of folks in Bastrop are well served. They say it themselves, right? Now, is that well served 25.3, or is that well served higher than that? Is it worth pursuing? If you already have a satisfied customer, why continue to ask? Smart city applications, in my opinion, the study calls for the city to go to a smart grid and traffic management. It does not account for the specific costs of adding that infrastructure, nor the staff to support it. So you've got a big question mark out there. So again, what's the benefit? And you don't have any cost identified. The study anticipates that there'd be a 40% uptake of people switching. I'm not a taker. I'm plenty satisfied with what I've got today. I would challenge that 40% is probably closer to 5. The study repeatedly cautions the city of Bastrop to stay out of the internet business. It does not behoove the city of Bastrop to become an ISP. The infrastructure cost for fixing fiber is outrageous. The security personnel that you need on hand to secure that network, the network administrators, the system administrators, the systems that go in place are exorbitant in cost, and they have to be upgraded on average every 3 to 5 years. So, you know, I don't see something in the plan to take care of the future. The polls scare the holy heck out of me, right? So there's 40 polls that, or I'm sorry, 40% of the polls that, based on their estimate, could not handle an added piece of wire added to them, and 40% are going to have to be either replaced or I don't know what. I don't understand the math for the funding on how those get replaced. I don't know if it's a phase 1, we take care of a few of them, and a phase 2, we take care of the rest of them. But if I don't understand the math, how can you do a cost estimate? There are times when you need to look at an executive summary and realize that feasibility studies are written to find the yes. If you dig through this one, there's a whole lot of no's. There's Bastrop stay out of the ISP business. There's Bastrop should not build a middle mile without understanding how fiber gets to someone's home. A hybrid network does not provide any better value than it does today. And in light of all of the other technologies that are coming on board, such as 5G network capabilities, fiber, as pointed out, is a yesterday technology. It's probably better than the copper we have today, but marginal. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. And, you know, just my own personal comment is that we're trying to answer some questions is what it appears to be, right? There's a question, does it make sense? Are we being underserved? Yes, no. Does it make sense financially wise? So right now, I think we're just asking questions. I don't look at this and say, this is the plan. I look at this and say, here's a study that says X, Y, and Z. And yes, you can make studies, you can interpret studies very different ways, I think. But your comments are well taken. I mean, yeah, some of it may look good, some of it may not look good. But I think right now we're in such an early stage of it, we're just trying to better understand things. And I believe that Councilman Kirkland is already asking for additional information. Hopefully we will also hear that information as well. And I think we have a long way to go, but it's, I mean, it's an interesting topic, and everybody really is talking about it. So we'll just see what comes out of it, but I appreciate very much your concerns and your comments about it. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. All right, we will now move to 3.6, receive BEDC updates. Welcome the new BEDC Executive Administrative Assistant and update on the status of the BEDC Main Street Program Agreement. So with that.
Good evening, Board. I just wanted to, some of you have already met Ashley Allnut. She's our new executive assistant in the office. Some of you haven't, so I just wanted to introduce her to you all, give her an opportunity to say hi, and help me welcome her to the BEDC.
Have the light on, don't you? Okay. So after a few discussions with folks and whatnot, we have engaged our attorney, Charlie, to work with the city attorney, Allen, I believe his name is, Allen, to redo or re-propose the Main Street agreement, going back to one that we've already agreed to in many times in the past. And we're waiting to hear back from Charlie to see what kind of status we have and how's it going. Charlie, do you have any update on that?
Because it was down. Okay. No, I've not yet heard back from the city attorney.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Well, we're working towards it. All right. Okay. What we're going to do is we are going to skip, for right now, number 4, the budget workshop. We're actually going to go into executive session. And when we return out of executive session, once we finish with that portion of it, then we'll start and go into the budget workshop. So with that, we're going to go into executive session.
Chair, you have to read the items.
My apologies. The Bastrop EDC Board of Directors will meet in a closed executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Chapter 551 to discuss the following. Section 551.074, personnel matters, discussion on the Chief Executive Officer position. Number 2, Section 551.071, consultation with attorney regarding the Texas Open Meetings Act. Number 3, Section 551.087, deliberation regarding economic development negotiations called Project Western Edge and Colorado Bend Project, the Project Walk for Fame. And after that, the BEDC Board of Directors will reconvene into open session to discuss, consider, and take any actions necessary related to the executive sessions noted herein. Thank you. So the time now is 7:54 p.m. and we're reconvening from executive session back into open session. And we are now going to go to 4.1, the budget workshop. The Bastrop EDC Board will meet in a budget workshop session to review and discuss all matters related to the BEDC's draft budget for fiscal year 2022-2023. And I'm going to turn it over to our treasurer, Mr. Bill.
Okay, so first of all, this is not a normal year. If it was a normal year, we'd actually have a CEO. We'd be reviewing what the CEO's budget proposed, and we'd all be shooting arrows at it. Could be. But I took a different approach. And as we took this different approach, two other things happened. We were supposed to have had a meeting already on the 6th of June, or 7th of June, sorry, and I was hung in Germany with a delay because of a false test, which caused me to not be able to book tickets for 10 days until I got a positive test and then booked the next day. And so that was good. And then there was also COVID events around town and stuff, so the overall those meetings were postponed. So what I've done and what we prepared, I've worked primarily with Angela and some input as well from Jean, is took a look at the different phases of the budget as it has been in the past, and knowing that we've been an an incomplete staffed budget, and took that into consideration. We also reached out to Tracy Waldron, our CFO, and she was able to provide significant input on our data with respect to income and debt and assets. So in general, this is a working session. This is not the presentation of the BEDC budget for approval. And in fact, it's going to have more questions and comments, and essentially that's what I'm looking at, is to be able to answer those questions or capture those comments on things we want to add to or take away from the budget in a discussion. And that's why this is an open discussion review. And I'm going to ask Angela as well to help capture action items as we hit per slide, the things we want to incorporate. So to begin with, as an introduction, the revenue data is provided by Tracy, our CFO. She has provided that. It is fully consistent with what the city is considering as their budget. It does not make any sense for the BEDC to have a different income budget than the city, since the data is the same data source. With that said, 0.5% of the sales tax goes to the BEDC, while the city revenue is 1%, and we have other investment income, which we'll spell out. So essentially, we're half of what the city gets in terms of their inbound sales tax. Investment cash relates to text pool, CDs, and other investments. We'll have a breakdown of that. Debt service provided by the CFO is based on the current and existing bonds. The major differences for next year's budget is this year, as you're aware of, we have retired the Roscoe loan related to the 921 Main Street project completion and the sale of that asset, as well as the prepayment of the 2018 bond, which was prepayable with no penalties. Additional... Just a yoo-hoo is good enough. No additional bonds are in this budget, so there's no projected requirement for more money or more bonds. Based on where we are today, as we go into the projects and the things that we desire to do, that may change that outcome. Administrative, AKA personnel, agreement on staffing is what we need to achieve. Base salary, we back calculate, the city backfills in with the details, Social Security, retirement, all of that. That'll be in line with the city. So we don't have to have that discussion about those details. Our number one discussion will be personnel. Do we have the right head count and roughly what we're expecting of them? Okay. Any questions from that slide? Oh, apparently not. We're on to the next slide. So any questions at this point? All right, we'll move on to the next page. Operational expenses. What we're looking at, brief review of the operational expenses. Mainly, they're an extension of the existing cost in the existing budget. The budget is based on fully staffed, and so based on what we had in the budget and where we are, the budget would stay pretty much about the same. Marketing and advertising, brief review, maintained just about the same as what we had in the last budget. Again, spending is a little bit under, but under mainly because we don't have full staff getting things executed. Professional services, incremental changes. Delta's really with respect to consulting and moving temporary director to a permanent hire and shows up in the personnel. So this is really Genora's costs now coming off of technical personnel services and moving into personnel directly, as we expect that to be a full position. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so that's the general background. Now we'll go into some more of the summary of the details. When we look at the additional parts that we have to reach, city projects and services, we need to update the existing form prior to the budget, which means we need to know what we want to be spending our money on, what we want to be doing our work on. Projects, programs, and grants, infrastructure projects, new projects, and commitments and reserves. We've got a statement in the back as a follow-up, what we have commitments to, which are agreements that are already in place, that we have essentially the future liabilities that we do need to respect, and then reserves that are required, and we can talk a little bit about what the reserves are. They're in line with the city's reserves. Okay. So next page. All right. So projections from the CFO is specifics on sales tax revenue, and the basis of projections is 3.3 million, will increase to 4.18 million for next year. It's a 25.5% increase. That is a projection of the 20% increase that we're seeing currently and an additional 5% increase for the next year. So sales tax is what I just finished describing. Is that paragraph? Specific on investments in the base of projections, it remains the same at $15,000 or less. Our current investments that we have are earning less than 0.1% in general. And the other benefit that we have is we have a cell tower lease, and so we get $15.9 thousand on that lease on a yearly basis. Okay. When we look at real estate proceeds, current year estimated 1.5 million based on the closed projects of Swipe, Fiesta, Superglue, offsetting obligations in expenses. What that means is those become future obligations. So in the performance agreements that we have, we assume and expect, and it's our job to help all of the companies try and achieve their objectives in their performance agreements. That's what's good for the city and for the companies. And that therefore becomes an obligation to repay. And so those are net washes and shouldn't really be considered in, let's say, the overall budget effect. No additional forecast is net neutral with the offset obligation. All rental income from 921 stopped with the sale, so that dropped off from the current budget into the future budget. Okay. So final projection, we look at about 4.2 million of total income for next year's budget. Okay. This eye chart, okay, this is the cash details. This is what we have in terms of the operating account. These are the investments we have. I think the key is when you move over to the right, the total, and you start looking below, the total is 8.2 million. That's what we looked at the end of May. Sorry. Yeah, 8.2 million. That's what we've got in investments in the accounts. Okay. Next. When you look at the details overall in the summary, if you can stop using it. Thank you. So when you look at that, you look at April 30 of 2022, the total market value is 8.18, book value 8.2. So 8.2 million is the total for CDs, the pools, the money market accounts, and the demand deposits that we have in the bank. So that's again, what we have in terms of, let's say, somewhat liquid available monies. Okay. Next page. When we look at debt service, we've narrowed down the debt, as I had said before. We've eliminated the debt for 921. We've eliminated the 2018. So what this leaves behind is the 4 identified debts that exist. So the total debt balance is $2.82 million. Final projected debt service for next year, the projection was $271,000. That's down from the $483,000 due to the 2 loan payoffs that we've already done. Okay. So it's about 10% of our, we're paying about 10% a year of our debt balance. Okay. Any questions so far? Next page. Okay. So here comes the fun part. This is the interactive aspect of the project. We look at the budget to be last year, compared to last year. What we're looking at is the number of positions and the positions that we have in terms of financing in the budget. So director, president, CEO, whatever we call them du jour, that's an active search, expected to be fully budgeted for next year. Ashley, Jean, Angela. We also look at a project assurance manager that's being interviewed currently. We've talked about the concierge facilitator and the marketing communications position, which was a new proposal that would bring our staffing up to 2, 4, 6, 7 total if we do that in this projection. So at this point, that final projection would be $850,000, up from 555.6. We consider including or upping the auto allowance. I don't have a good number for that. I know 6 is probably, an auto allowance is going to be higher than 6 nowadays. I estimated 10. It could be higher. Take input for anybody at this point for this, as well as the relocation, putting $25,000 in to handle a relocation of a CEO to the location, assuming there may be something. We don't know where he's from or she's from, or in-state, out-of-state, whatever, hopefully within the country. And so from that, it's a placeholder, could go high, could go low, and we could manage that. Okay. So my questions at this point is we need to kind of solidify this slide so that we can move forward. The expectation is that we take the input from this meeting and the data that we get, and then I'll be able to go back with Angela and sit down and get this loaded up in both the HR system for the city so we can get all those other background things loaded in, and then be able to load it into their system so we can get into the consolidated budget for the city. So this is where I'm looking at, is we okay for auto allowance going from 6 to 10? Any comments on being higher?
Yeah, I would probably just double and go on up to 12, because we really don't know what is going to take place here in these next several months here or so, and with inflation and with gasoline and everything else. I would say bring it up to 12,000 just to be a little more on the safe side.
Okay. Okay. And relocation, 25, okay, as a placeholder? I mean, don't have anything else.
Until we know, until we know who we're hiring and where they're coming from, what the exact cost is, I think that's probably a workable number.
Okay. And then the positions, the 7 positions.
I'd like to follow Mr. Weathers' advice that was in his report, that the first person that should be hired is the director/CEO/president/ we're calling them, and let that CEO decide who and when they want to hire. I think that I'm completely fine with the 850 being there so that they've got some leeway, and we would do budget adjustments anyway, but I don't think we should be hiring anybody until we get the CEO, and then the CEO should, that's my opinion in it, and I'm doing that, a lot of that based on Mr. Weathers' recommendation.
I'm just saying it might not be that long, a couple of 3 months. I don't know. Is that too long? I mean, give the new CEO some ability to pick a couple of people of his own. First.
Okay. But 850 is a budget, probably good enough to move forward
I would think so.
for now. And like you said, we would budget adjust based on where we are as we need.
I agree. The personnel budget, I'm satisfied with the 850. I would like to keep the position and the titles somewhat open,
Right.
so that the CEO can make his determination.
Okay. In order to make this happen with the city's got an extremely rigid budgeting process related to HR. And so you actually have to define what the position is, what the grade point is, what the salary is, and all of this in order for them to do that. So
That tends to happen with public funds.
Exactly.
That's
And
why
in
we're
the
required to do
budget,
that.
in the budget process, we'll do what we need to do to make it fit in there, so we end up with about the 850 budget, and then let the rest of it fall out from there, okay? So titles may look strange, but overall, we would stick with that, okay? All righty. Next page. Budget operational expenses. This is the routine operational expenses. You can see what they are. Essentially, the budget increase from last year by 6.5%, essentially 131K to 140. The expenses from 921 Main Street expenses, and an increase is offset with an increase of equipment office with the full staffing on board. What we expect is we're going to have a few more computers, cell phone, things like that are all going to fit in with office expenses. Increased utilities and communications combined from 12 to 20.6. This actually came back mainly from the communication side of the increase. The rest of the line items, supplies, postage, office equipment, maintenance, the Bastrop Industrial Park maintenance, all of those generally are essentially remaining about the same. So really the key increase is related to the communication side of utilities and communication.
Question here. You're going up roughly 6.5%, but that doesn't keep up with inflation, and we know there's probably, it has a potential to go higher than the 8.9 or 9 that it is today.
Yeah, but remember that your 6.5 is based on the 921 expenses, which are now gone.
Right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're keeping up with the inflation is my only point here. So if it's offset, then fine.
Yeah, I think we're pretty good with the offset. So agreement on this page, we okay going 140 to 131? And again, my premise for budgeting and budget work is budgeting is an art, it's not a science. And so what you see is that I generally will remove decimal places from a lot of these. So a 140 is the target. Okay. If we can go to the next page. So we look at marketing and advertising. Note right now that maintain the budget at 231. This is what we had last year. It was good enough last year. It's probably good enough for next year. We don't even have the staffing at that point to develop more marketing per se. So that would come along with this. What you notice is that we do have a 10% cap on revenue. And so if you go back to the original slide about our revenue being 4.2 million combined, we have a limit of 10% of that we can apply towards marketing and advertising. Technically, that would also include part of the marketing position as it has in the past. And so this is why we keep track of what we fund and what's spent on marketing and advertising. Because even though we may give money to other organizations to do activities, we still are responsible for tracking marketing and advertising. So at this point, no change in the budget. We keep it as is. Any comments? Agreement? Jeff, you good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question, and I apologize. I'm looking at the operating budget, and the marketing and advertising forecast for 2022 was $729,000, and this slide says it's 231.
it's a combined.
It's saying it's expense forecast and expense actual, but you wouldn't be that far over the budget. So something, it must be a portion of it and something else is
That's what I
combined
think, something's
in it.
combined in that,
I don't know.
because it doesn't match
But the
up.
numbers are
Yeah.
way off.
I would need to see it, what exactly, Mary, you're looking at, so that I would, okay, the financials, got it. Yes, Tracy does, I'm sorry, CFO Waldron does have a different formula for the way she does it. Ours came about as a direct result of communications with our attorneys and some meetings with them to see what we, in fact, he, as I recall, got with the comptroller's office and went line by line with our budget to tell what's marketing and what's not, or what's, I'm sorry, what's the word for it? Not marketing.
No.
You did not. It was one of your attorneys in your office, Charlie. But what is the promotional?
But the mayor's
Promotional in
looking at
nature.
the budget, at the line item.
Right.
That's showing 700 in Tracy's monthly.
Correct.
That's not matching up with the spreadsheet.
Correct.
So it's not that.
Tracy adds it up differently.
Right. Okay. So it's not the spreadsheets for budgeting, it's the city reporting. So we'll look into that, why the delta with Tracy's, sorry, CFOs. Okay. Next page, professional services. What the final projections is 180,000 down from 358 this year. This is really rearranging items. Professional services down to only the last 2 months of Steve's contracts, and no interim director costs would be existing in these professional services. Audit increases from 4 to 5 based on the latest communication from the city on the city services agreement if we accept it, so we take that in case. Legal reduction, 75 to 70.
Right. So
My expectation is we're doing a lot less stress.
Right. I'm not commenting on the budget amount, but I think now is a good time for me to tell you I've not raised your rates in 6 years, so you will be seeing a letter will be coming.
Okay.
At least.
So the way I look at this is we sure did spend a lot of time on legal issues in the past year that I think are now past us now that everything's been settled out.
But we also have some projects ahead of us as well.
And we've cleared a lot of projects already. So I think we're, I mean, we can move it up.
I'd make it flat.
You want to make it flat?
Since he's saying his rate's getting ready to go up.
All right, so page 11, we'll move legal up to 100,000? Was that? Oh, 75, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I'm just kidding.
He's not saying no.
Make it 200.
Yeah, whatever, right?
Whatever.
It's less than 10%.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Engineering remains the same at 15,000. That's pretty much a placeholder for engineering work we may need to do. We could revisit that later based on what projects we look at moving forward if we need to that are not in a project, because essentially if we have a defined project, engineering would then be in the defined project. So this is really engineering not in a defined project. Contractual services, recruiting fees about 50,000. Should be paying ahead some of Jorgensen's recruiting fees this budget year as they occur. And yeah, Jen will make sure we get that done as best we can to move those fees into this year.
I would like to, for budget purposes, and even as I asked during the meeting for reporting, we ought to be able to, I really would like us to be able to say to the community, we spent this much money recruiting somebody, you know, a special contract that we can show
Yep.
those costs for both the consultant, Mr. Weathers, and Jorgensen.
So that would move the total from 185 to 180 to up to 185 if we keep the legal the same. All right. We good with that one? All right. If we move on to the next. So here's where we get into the projects that we have on our budget. This is what was defined in the budget last year for the BEDC. Share City Services, IT and Systems. That's going to increase from 7.5 to 10. We estimate due to staffing increases. It's only incremental. Why IT and systems is, but okay. City admin services increases from 18 to 20. That's based on the latest agreement. Essentially, what was sent over by the city was a total of 25,000, and 5,000 was in audit, and 20,000 was in other services. And so that's where those numbers came from. Main Street program support, assume we remain at 50,000. Whether anything is spent this year or not is irrelevant to our budget. Next year, it would be 50,000. If we don't have an agreement before we go into next year, I don't see any reason to be carrying over 100,000 next year. So I did not put that in. City projects and programs, sports complex study was estimated 50,000. Next year, if we just keep it the way it was, 50,000. From what I understand, Parks and Rec is kind of leading that study and probably wouldn't get going until next budget year anyway. Even if they got started now, the first invoices wouldn't probably happen until next year. Downtown lighting, not sure where that one is, but 164 was budgeted for this year. From what I understand, there's conceptual or concept changes, so there's not a new program yet. So again, my recommendation is with nothing new, we know nothing new, unless there's direction that says we're not doing that, just to leave the same number there. Agnes Street grant 1%. It's in the city's data as well, and I think that's still not done yet, so I don't think it's going to be anything more than that at this point. The agreement's at 1%. And the broadband study. Broadband study is what we just listened to today. Original budget was 50,000. Our CFO confirmed that the invoice will happen this year. They have got an invoice, 47. It was charged. It was reversed. It's supposed to get charged back again. And so that should hit our books this month, if not next month, to move forward. So essentially, we're assuming the first 3 projects would roll over into next budget year. I just need confirmation if that's true or not. If that is true, then the final budget would be 337, down from 399. The next comment would be any additional projects at that level. Okay. Are we good to go with 337 for now?
Yeah, are we budgeting anything for any projects that are coming up that
Yeah.
we haven't thought of yet?
We've got another sheet too as well as in terms of looking at some major projects. Those are the only ones that have been brought to us so far that would be identified at this point. So, okay? All right. Okay. Next page. So these are the programs and grants, projects-related programs and grants. These are items that have been funded or multi-funded over years. Film Bastrop at 15,000, again assumed to move over. Redevelopment grants, 325 moving down to 150. Mainly it goes to the ability to execute the different grants and what we have grants for. A lot of the grants dealt with COVID in the past.
That's what I was going to ask.
The redevelopment
We even
grant,
have a program in place for a redevelopment grant?
well, we don't have any parameters in place for, let's say, a facade grant program. We had them, and then there were some issues, there were some changes at Main Street, so it was just put on hold. The redevelopment grant, your expenditure from this year was mostly due to Project Gummy Bears.
That's right.
Because a portion of it was for redevelopment, a portion of it was for education, and a portion of it was for cash incentives.
Thank
So
you.
it's split 3 ways.
Yep,
Yes, sir.
That's right. I forgot that. Education and workforce grant development, we had 60,000 in based on input from Gene. I think even with Jen, some comments about wanting to move that up some to 75,000. And again, we kind of heard even from the presentation from Steve today about, you know, we're doing more with this with the ISD. So it's in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd take the redevelopment down and education up, because, and make them, you know, like 150 and 100 or whatever, because when the new CEO comes, they're going to decide how they want to spend stuff, but it would be showing a commitment to education as a part of the budget if we took that number up a little bit, in my opinion.
So we had redevelopment down from 325 to 150, take education up to from 75 to 100, or from.
I would take it from the redevelopment.
So take redevelopment down to 100,
Just a little bit.
or 125.
25 and put the other one at 100, and it shows that, makes them a little more even.
Okay. And then entrepreneurial and small business and retail recruiting. So entrepreneurial and small business staying at 50. Retail recruiting, really that relates to the contracts we have with the retail firms for the studies. And so those would stay the same.
We don't think Retail Coach is going to increase their prices too? I would assume that's Retail Coach. Is that somebody else?
We had been looking at an additional retail recruitment company to kind of coincide. They did something a little bit different, and we ended up not working with them. So that 40,000 would
be an increase for.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. So you planned on 2 vendors, you only used 1 vendor, so if you keep it the same, that's giving you more money for a single vendor?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I was just trying to make sure that we didn't end up short for, okay.
All right. The other 380 agreement with Burleson Crossing, that is, according to our CFO, that is completing this year. And so that would go to 0 for next year. When we look at water rights, the water rights payment still $60,000 a year. Apparently that's going to end in 2024. When we look at the land grants and rebates, we still have $9,000 out there for AEI. That's still a performance agreement, open-ended. That's still an obligation to pay. We would expect that would still happen, or work with them to clear that off. Disaster relief grants, $50,000, not a driving need to change that. Business retention expansion, again, at this point, not a driving need to change what we had budgeted. Cash incentives, the 910 Water Street, this is the second half of what Angela just commented above that was part of the redevelopment grant. This is the other one. We don't have another one ready to go, so $100,000 is a placeholder for future grant if we achieve one. Cash incentives, sorry, that was cash incentive. Real estate closing costs, again, that's now a $25K placeholder for closing if we need to. The 165 was higher this year because of the closing costs on 921, and so that's why that's a little bit higher for this year. So overall, the project and programs grant would essentially cut in half based on where we are, which is not unreasonable for right now. If next year is really about getting ourselves staffed, fully organized, and moving ahead. And again, if we have any new programs or grants, we can add them into the list.
How do you get to 1.46 million? Because there's not enough up there.
From last year.
So this isn't a total list?
3 and 3 is 6, and 3 is 9, and 3 is the current year. 1.46 is the current year. It's the left column. The next year is about 724.
I was reading that as the number was down 1.46
No,
million. I was
down from 1.46 million. No, it's all right.
reading the words wrong.
It's all right. Okay, so that's where we're at. It
I-
will not be 724. We'll rearrange it with well, it should be because we'll move 25 between the two columns. Yes, sir.
With the problems of recruitment and retention, and if the trend continues, I'd like to see 150 put in the educational workforce development. We may have to become a little bit more proactive to ensure we have a viable workforce.
Okay. We good with staying with 150 at 75, going to 150, going once, going twice, sold, and Mr. Lyle.
It's peanuts and you can't spend it till you have a good project.
Exactly. So we'll go 150, essentially it'll go up 50. will be at about 775 for a total. We'll check the math at the end for this one. Okay? All right. So, infrastructure projects. Now, this is where we get into some of the items. One of them is, the first line item is still a accounting issue, because paying our fiber optic bill to the fiber optic provider in the industrial park is obviously not an infrastructure project.
We attempted to include it as an infrastructure project so we could take it out of the bond from 2013.
Okay.
We were trying, it just didn't work out.
Yep. So, but that's our budget. I think the thing that has done well is that discussions with the staff has negotiated that down from what was 103 down to 83,000 a year for service to the industrial park. Downtown trail expansion, 13K, that should be done. So there is no budget for next year. When we look at the BIP Technology Drive MLK infrastructure, originally that's the extension of the road where it would kind of come up and cross South Street going into MLK. My suggestion was to up that to $2 million. This is the art of budget. It's been $1.5 million for a couple years, and I think building expenses have gone up a little bit. So essentially, I would recommend that we go at $2 million. If it's 2.5, we're only off by 25%. If we bring it at 1.5, then we're 25% lower.
So based on what we just, are we sure this is enough for 2023 based on earlier conversations?
I think based on where we are in engineering at this point, it's the best we got to go on right now. So, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Okay. And then the other part is the MoCA expansion. That's the extension of the road from the after crossing the right-of-way, the pipeline right-of-way, to build out towards MoCA. That's a commitment for $1 million, and we've got that.
What about Phase 2 for the industrial park and all of the roads associated with Phase 2?
That's that little line right there that says new infrastructure projects. So this really comes back into what else do we want to take on and digest in this. This is really taking the existing budget and saying what would we continue on for next year.
Well, since we've technically are behind the curve and should have already been working on Phase 2, even if it's just a placeholder, like technology's been on there longer than I've been on this board. So I think having Phase 2 on there would remind all of us that we really do need to finish the industrial park. It really is going to cost something. It really is going to have to be engineered. It really is going to have to be built. Mm-hmm. And I also think that gets us closer to shovel-ready property, which I think would make it much easier for staff to try to finish out the completion of the industrial park.
Okay. I'm in agreement with that as well. This is part of what our projection to be shovel-ready is. I don't want to really get into phases because we work so hard to try and eliminate the words phases from them, but we can go back.
Finish the industrial park.
So, step 2 or whatever, south half, whatever, we'll come up with a name that's, let's say, viable for that.
So that it can be yet another name for it?
Yeah.
We need to freshen up the
name. Can staff get some sort of a ballpark? Okay.
And it's clearly a number that can change, but I just think it being there as a reminder might help us.
If we look just on what MLK is, and we just look at the little road that's on the side, you know, those combined are looking at $3 million. I would not be hesitant to say let's go to $5 million and see what it is for now. So it's about a $5 million hit. The question is it's not going to happen all next year. So what I would recommend is let's go 2.5 million this year, or sorry, next budget, and 2.5, or go.
I do like 1 and 4 because you got to do a bunch of engineering. You got to do platting. You got to do the. You know, you're going to do quite a bit of engineering and decide what you want and.
Okay.
And you can always move it, right? You can always pull it back if you.
Sure.
If you're able to get it done.
Consensus? We good with 1 million for next year? So, and 4 million for the year after. Total for 5 until we get better numbers.
Okay. Just don't call it Phase 12.
Yeah, yeah. It'd be phase 10 and we get hit with a copyright infringement.
I really do like finish. You know, the idea of complete or, you know.
Finish build out?
Yeah.
Finish one.
Yeah, finish phase
Finish,
1.
finish, not finish like the country, but
Right.
finish the, oh my God, I'm not gonna be able to get home. Finish the Bastrop industrial.
BIP build out?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So other major projects, are we good for that? That's going to move us up from 3 to 4. And then we would put the other $4 million in next year's budget. Any other major infrastructure projects?
On that project, when we discuss it, please don't define things like streets, because it's going to have to include a lot of things, right? Utilities and
Drainage.
detention, and there's things that it may have to include that we're not thinking about. So let's make it pretty generic until we get better information.
Mm-hmm. That's why I had build out.
Should we look at maybe discussing it as master planning?
No, I'd like to go past master planning is planning. Build out is actually physically doing it.
Okay.
We want to get it shovel ready. Part of that would be master plan at the front end, and then connect it all into to the build out.
Okay, so maybe the $1 million, I mean, do you want to break it apart like that or just leave it?
I would rather leave it
Okay.
as one project and just get her done. That's what I would like to do.
And then if it goes real smooth, then you can pull it in, but it's all one line item.
Yep.
Because we'll have to account for things underneath that,
Right.
so.
Wow.
Yeah, with this sort of project, we'll need that flexibility to be able to define what projects we'll fund this first year so we can move into that second year with the $4 million. So,
Yep.
Yep.
Makes sense. Okay. So we'll adjust that one. Anything else to go on to the infrastructure project for this? Okay. And if we move over to the next page, this is a discussion about future commitments and reserves. So we had this discussion, this was raised in a meeting before. So what we've got is we need to be considerate of the fact that we have 1.433 million in combined obligations, i.e. liabilities, related to performance agreements. So when we're looking at our budget and what we got in the bank and all of that, we got to be ready to refund back to these companies up to this 1.433 million. So we need to be aware of that and have that in reserve. We have that in reserve. We're okay for now. Cash reserve definition is that we're following follows the city's definition according to our CFO. The city wishes to retain 25% of the operating expenses in cash reserve. And so essentially that's a 90-day buffer of reserves in cash. And based on our calculation, we look at cash reserve requirement is about $825,000. It would then come down to $615,000 cash reserves based on the current budget due to some of the reductions in the expenses for professional services in particular. Okay. Any questions related to that? Okay. Next slide. So this eye chart is essentially the sum up, and now my columns have flip-flopped because in case you were fading away and nodding off, we went ahead and switched the columns. So we start looking at where we are on the adjusted budget in the current year, and then we take a look at where our budget for the next year will be. We're at the future obligations. You're looking at a comparison to where we are. Total expenses, about 2/3 the way down, is 6.4 million from 5.8 million. If we look at the rough number of adjustments that we've made, we've talked a little bit here, a little bit there, but the main one is an extra $1 million. That would take our budget to 6.8 million, essentially from the 6.4 million of the current year. So again, we're well within where we are in terms of what we've got on hand, what we've got on income. The one thing that we need to be very conscious of is we had a discussion early on about what's our income. Our income is about 4.2 million. What you're seeing here is our expenses, will now reach 6.8 million, and our bank's got about 8 million in it. We got about 1.4 million of obligations. You got another 600,000 reserve. That's 2 million. Essentially, at this rate, you got an operating life of about 3 years. Okay? Just to kind of lay it out to where we are with what's in the bank, what we're spending, and what's coming in. Our objective as a BEDC is to grow the city and to help with development. So the project we do should be increasing sales tax, should be increasing benefits to the city, as well as the companies that are coming. But one thing to keep in mind is that we do budget in excess of our income. And so, like I said, we're good for now. We're probably good for next year. After that, we need to be kind of looking at what we're spending on and what we got going on, okay? And then you get into issues of bonds and bond funding for projects of the future, okay? So this was a different approach than what we've had before. We tried to avoid the spreadsheets because we needed the input in order to build the spreadsheets. So when we took a look at doing the first meeting on the 7th and the follow-up meeting on the 10th, we would have had then the spreadsheets able to fill in with the discussions and the decisions that we made here. So with this, we'll go forward, we'll fill it in, and then once we finish filling it into the system of the city, we'll be able to extract the city reports and be able to see what is the final numbers that come out, and then we can share that with the board.
You're not planning on funding any of the CIP projects that were requested?
If you want to add them on, then we add them on. That's the budget.
So do we have a list of the projects?
Which list?
The CIP, the city CIP that had requested, you know, Councilmember Plunkett and I saw it on May 12th. So I know it was provided.
So, do you have that?
And a lot of those are going to go beyond 2023, so.
Yeah, but, and that's really why I was asking.
Actually, it doesn't, because he had 4.6 million coming on next year's budget. So when you look at the city manager's capital improvement plan, B4 only, that he prepared, if you got that, Angela, you still hunting for that one to come up? Can it flash up on the screen or not?
I would have to send it over to Rick. If you want to hang on for just a second, I think he can get it.
Do you want to put it up on there, or do you want me to read it off? So what was in the...
Do you want to borrow my computer?
No, I got...
Okay.
So what was identified was Blakey Lane extension, $6 million, $1 million next year, $5 million the year after. Agnes Street extension, 1%, was already in our budget and already considered. South Street to Lovers Lane, $3 million total, and all $3 million next year. Intersection improvements, undefined, $230,000 next year. Transportation impact fee study, undefined, $8,000 for next year. A meal neighborhood regulatory plan, which I don't even think we can touch as a neighborhood plan, as a BEDC, but that's that was $100,000. And a transportation master plan, not sure what the scope of that was, but another $200,000. And so that was the projections for the transportation projects. So the total of that was 4.6 million next year and another 5 million the year after. So that was done.
Well, I think
the other project on the list was the electrical projects. Electrical projects defined was a fiber optic network infrastructure phase 1 and 2 for $14.5 million, with $2 million going next year, $1.2 million the year after, and $11.3 million the year after, and the years beyond that. So the grand total was $24.1 million that the city manager had proposed for B4, $6.61 million for next year, $6.2 million for the year after, and $11.3 million. The city manager also noted that the BEDC would take on a $20 million of debt and give it to the projects. BEDC would pay off the loan. It would be a 20-year loan with an additional $1.5 million a year of debt service for 20 years, so essentially $30 million over 20 years to pay off the $20 million. So that was the summary, general summary of the city manager's CIP plan.
Okay, well, that's clearly, that was what I was asking about. Were we ignoring that? Number two, the city manager prepared it, but council said, yes, proceed with the budget with those assumptions, and the assumptions included the $4B. And we don't have to do all of them, but it sure seems like we ought to talk about them. And we funded Agnes south of 71, and Blakey is north of 71 in an area that we're already seeing quite a bit of activity, and that's already on the master transportation, and that's got some even public health and safety, just as far as just transportation for economic development in that area, in that 96971. The South Street, we've had a conversation about. It seems like that's worth putting in my opinion. And the intersections, I know when we talked about it at the April 25th workshop, when council talked about it at the April 25th workshop, and again at the May 12th, it's basically the intersections with 71 that are within the city limits that are, help me out, Councilmember Plunkett, west of the river, right? It was, instead of doing a transportation master plan for them to tell us, hey, your intersections need work, we were going to work on the intersections. From an economic development standpoint, all of those intersections have retail businesses that are impacted by them not being at a decent level of service.
Yeah, I think we were talking about, it was Hassler, 150, Childress, yeah. And probably going back to 304, yeah.
Speaker up.
The law says that because we're under 20,000, if an expenditure will promote new or expanded business development, this board has to make those findings. You can do infrastructure for this. There's a specific provision for infrastructure which includes roads and streets, but it would also have to promote new or expanded business enterprises. And those are the findings that would need to be made. Anything has to promote new or expanded business enterprises. Unless it's an otherwise authorized project, which we could go through to determine. I have not done any legal analysis on any of the CIP projects requested by City Council, so.
And we haven't done any discussion or deep dive on that as well as a
And that's why I
BDC
wouldn't,
board.
until y'all decide whether or not it's something y'all want to fund. I'm not going to, waste your money going
Correct.
through it.
And that's why it's a workshop. So if we've added in, finish out the BIP build out, I don't know how you want to take on these projects or discussions of including them or not including them.
Well, I don't really know if there's enough information that we have right now to have more than just a topical discussion about it, right? I mean, if it's just transportation stuff, that's one thing. But we found out today the broadband, there's not enough information to make any kind of decision on that. So we should kind of maybe put that to, I don't know what proper terminology is, but table that or put it to the side for that portion of it. But I would like to have more information of what is actually being, specifically and broken down of what is actually being asked for. And I know we saw a presentation earlier, but it wasn't, we didn't really get into it more than just a very, topical surface type of discussion. So, I mean, to me, maybe what we do is have another, we were going to have 2 budget workshops. Maybe the next one that we have is specifically these right here.
So I'll fill out the budget with what we have, and then you've got the baseline of what's loaded, and then be able to.
I think you should add South Street.
Then be able to take in the other projects into consideration once we've got the base.
Just for clarification, when you say South Street, is that what we talked about earlier, or is that something different?
I believe those are 2 different conversations.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the recommendation is to put it in there, and then we have another meeting to break those out and discuss it to see which ones that we are able to do and which ones make sense for us, right?
So put in South Street?
Well, I think we need to do that. I think we need to look at all the
so
transportation.
if we put in South Street, do we put it in with the number that was supplied by the city manager, or do we put in the number that is most recent? It's about $1 million.
So just to clarify, South Street is a pretty big street from a right-of-way standpoint. One portion of it goes east and one portion of it goes west. And so I want to make sure that everybody is talking about the same thing. I think that proposed from the CIP aspect is actually a much bigger project than what you guys are, without going into great detail, I'm trying to kind of skirt what we're trying to talk about here. But I mean, it's just, those are 2 different asks.
The title is South Street to Lover's Lane.
I understand that. But it also starts over in Tahitian Village and Pine Forest Unit 6. It goes all the way across by the
Yeah, we wouldn't get that for $3 million.
That's not what's been shown to council on April 25th and May 12th.
Okay, then your question is?
2 million or 3 million? Latest number? I mean, I'm looking at city council members because obviously they have more information than we do, so what do you guys want to put in the budget?
No, we pretty much have all our meetings in public. You have access to the same
I know, but I
information
don't
we
sit
do.
and follow all of those at all the time, so I didn't have the meetings with the city manager. So,
I mean, 2 is what we got tonight, so.
so we put two in, and it's going to be done next year. We expect that we would have right-of-ways for crossings and all of that, and spending that in a year. That's the target, right? All right, so we'll add that one in. Blakey Extension, are we going to build Blakey Extension? Is there more information we need for that?
Well, if our budget is 22 and 23, then we've got $1 million in it for it. We're not talking about 24, right? 23, 24.
But again, once you start putting $1 million in, I mean, you can't be half pregnant on a road. You either get it done or you don't, you know. Well, I guess sometimes they just end roads in the middle of nowhere, but that's not advantageous. So again, it really, from my point of view, these are full commitments. Either you're on board, either we're doing it or we're not doing it. I mean, I'm not saying whether it needs to be done or doesn't need to be done. I just didn't know that the edict was the BEDC would be doing all this. I thought that was a board decision of the BEDC. And that's why we're having a discussion whether we are or not including it. So, I mean, this isn't the final. What we're doing is filling in the budget so that you guys can see what it looks like. And then the approval of that budget, at least from our standpoint as a board, that we would agree to that budget once you see it, and then it would be submitted in with the city manager for the city manager then to get the city council's approval of the budget. So, I mean, it's kind of a stepwise process. So not sure how, I think one of the key points of Steve's program was there's not a lot of communication, and this is kind of indication that there's not a lot of communication on agreements, and there's no joint session between City Council and BEDC to reach consensus on these topics. And so until that time, we kind of work it side to side until we're able to get it all brought together.
If I may, there was an ask by the city to include these in our CIP, or budgeted for their CIP.
Mm-hmm.
And, but other than that discussion with the city manager, we've had, to my recollection, no other discussion. So because of that, we're not even going to consider any of these projects within our budget considerations for presentation for approval to city, to not only to this board, but to the city council?
No, that's what we're here for today, is to go through what are we going to put in there? Are we going to put all of the $24 million that the city manager said he wanted to do into the BEDC budget? That's the question. And so what we started with was, from what I've heard so far, is set fiber optics aside for now, because it's not developed enough. Agnes Street's already included. We had consensus, I think, to include the South Street to Lover's Lane for $2 million. And then my next question was Blakey Lane. I mean, I'm kind of covering one by one, and just want to know, are we doing Blakey Lane or not? And it sure doesn't take long before we put the budget together that at the point of 1 commitments for 6, to make sure we are clear that we've run out of money in a hurry. And then if we're going to propose a budget that runs us out of money in a year, then I think we better be having a serious discussion about, are we going to go after different bonds and bonds issues to fund these things and how to fund them. It's a little bit deeper discussion that we would need to cover as well. Because we said, based on where we were before we started, we had, once we cover obligations and commitments, and we got $8 million in the bank, and that was $2 million, we'll be down to $6 million. We just tacked on $3 million with a commitment for $7 million. So essentially, in 2 years, we're $1 million underwater. And then if we load on Blakey, then we'll be $6 million on top. We'll be $7 million underwater.
But we all know that everything doesn't have to be paid with cash. So in 2015, Angela, and I don't just pick a year, we're currently looking at a debt service of $230,000. What was our debt service back when we were building roads and doing the industrial park and leveraging city tax dollars to make an economic impact to the community? And, you know, I can only go back to 21, and I'm thinking you have access to. There's a lot of people that live in a house that they can't pay cash for, right?
I didn't say, Mayor, what I said was that we would be having to present a funding option, whether it's a bond option or others, which is a deeper conversation than where we are at this point. I'm not contradicting.
And I think that was the intention, because when the presentation was made, the ability, the room and for debt obligation was certainly part of the discussion. I don't think the intention was that the council didn't approve a CIP project and expect the 4B funds to be paid for in cash on the day of the CIP request.
Correct, obvious.
Okay.
It's just a matter then of reaching it, what debts we want to encumber with, and then add that back into the budget as serviced. Because right now the service for the debt is at 270, I think we added about 270, down from 480. So when we turn around and take a $20 million debt at 1.5 million, when that 1.5 million goes back up in the budget for every year thereafter. So I think the city manager's budget also did not include money for one of the BEDC's main projects, was to build out and finish the build-out of the Bastrop Industrial Park. That wasn't in his presentation from what I understood. And right now we've got that on there too. So.
Right, because that would be a BEDC project, right? I mean, he would have been offended if he would have said, and you need to finish out your park. It's our park. What are you doing telling us how to spend our money? Like, you kind of...
So if I could make a suggestion then, we can put the transportation in there as a placeholder right now, but I would like to have another meeting to talk specifically about these, to go into a lot more depth, to discussions about which kind of funding we're going to talk about, whether it's going to be bonds or it's going to be other types of general obligation instruments, and where we can get a little bit better understanding of that. I mean, does that make sense to folks here?
So for instructions to complete, you just want me to load up all of the transportation projects in the budget? So everything we talked about today, and load up all of the city managers and all of that?
Yeah, without the broadband, yes, just the transportation.
Without broadband, and then we can identify what kind of bonding we would want to go after.
We'll have a further discussion on it, right. Yes, I think that's just, it gives us an opportunity to incorporate all of these things, and then we can really discuss and break it out and see which ones, because it may be very doable, or maybe we might have to not agree to all of it, but maybe.
Because it can be a timing thing,
right? It's a timing thing, and we'll see what it is that we can do, but I don't think anybody here wants us to go bankrupt in a year or two. I don't think that's the point. It's what's the highest and best use of what we can do. But me personally, I don't have enough information today in this 10 minutes to like approve anything. It's just I'd like to have more information, but to kind of wrap this session up, if we could put it there as a placeholder and then further discuss it, would that be? It'd be another special board meeting for a workshop. So, do we have enough time to do that? Also, I mean, help me understand. Do we need to turn this thing in before the end of the month? Is that the timeline?
We're supposed to have preliminary budget numbers uploaded into the city's finance system by the 30th. It's still considered a working document right up until the time it's approved by council. Council is my understanding.
So we basically need to get this done like Monday next.
I've checked. The council's chambers is available next Monday if the board so chooses.
I think we need to do that. Does everybody pretty much agree with that? I mean, we have to do it. So let's see if we can't structure that for next Monday. All right.
Any idea on the time? Just a regular 5 o'clock, or are we thinking of something earlier in the day?
Give me a second here. Yeah, you can't do anything until 4, right? So I guess is 5 o'clock work for folks? Does that work for everybody? All right, well, let's set it up for 5
Except
o'clock.
it's my wife's birthday, I'll have to clear that with her. So.
Ooh, yeah.
My birthday is the next board meeting on the 18th, so y'all want to move that one?
I have a strong sense of survival, I'll just put it like that.
It was just a joke. It was something that Jade and I were talking about earlier today. It was like
given that, let's shoot for an hour. It might go over, but let's at least shoot for an hour. Because I know you obviously don't want to miss your wife's birthday. I mean, you'd be in trouble. I wouldn't, but
no. Whatever works best for the group, I'll manage. I'm just throwing that out. Just whatever works for the group, I'll certainly manage it accordingly.
Okay. And then we'll be able to invite someone from the city who knows the details of the asks, and then they can kind of go through these one by one, and that'll help us, I think. Good, I think I got everything I need, and I think Angela and I will be able to get the core of this loaded up. We'll be able to see where things are, and then we can take a look at the discussion next Monday.
All right, well, if
I
there's...
want to commend you on the effort thus far. I really appreciate, I know it's a cumbersome process, but I
Good
really
job.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
This is our longest meeting in a long time.